Tonight, a man who never wanted to stand out must stand before hundreds of eyes, not to defend himself, but to defend a woman he barely knows. A billionaire on the run from his past, a powerful and ruthless neighborhood council chairman, and a single father who just wanted a peaceful life, but now must fight for it all. This is the story of when truth clashes with power and when a small neighborhood fight becomes a battle for dignity, family, and the future. Follow this story to the end. Like and comment with the city you're watching to let me know how far my story has progressed. Ethan Cole learned a long time ago that the safest way to live was to keep your head down, do your job, and stay out of other people's business. That philosophy had served him well for 32 years, right up until the exact moment he broke it. The October evening had started innocuously enough. The annual Ridgemont Heights block party sprawled across Maple Grove Circle like it did every year, complete with folding tables sagging under potluck contributions, a DJ who peaked in 1987, and neighbors who smiled at each other exactly once annually before retreating behind their privacy fences for another 12 months. Ethan had only come because his daughter Maya had begged him, her 7-year-old logic insisting that missing the block party would somehow result in social catastrophe. "Dad, everyone will be there," she'd said that morning, bouncing on his bed at an hour that shouldn't exist on a Saturday. Everyone. Even Mr. Patterson, and he never leaves his house except to yell at kids on bikes. Ethan had mumbled something non-committal into his pillow, but Maya was relentless. She'd inherited that from her mother, the ability to wear down opposition through sheer persistence and an earnest faith that people were fundamentally good and wanted to participate in community events. Ethan knew better, but he also knew when he was beaten. So there he stood at 6:30 in the evening, paper plate in hand, watching Maya dart between clusters of kids while he occupied his usual position, the edge of everything. He'd mastered the art of attending without participating, of being present without being noticed. It was a survival skill he'd developed over the past 3 years, since Maya's mother had decided that suburban motherhood wasn't compatible with her need for self-actualization and had relocated to Portland to find herself. Ethan had stayed. Someone had to. He took a bite of something that was allegedly potato salad, but tasted primarily of mayonnaise in regret. Across the circle, he could see the usual suspects occupying their usual territories. The Hendersons had claimed the beverage table, where Jennifer Henderson held court with a wine spritzer and running commentary on everyone's life choices. The Patels had brought enough samosas to feed a small army and were cheerfully ignoring the fact that Carol Winters kept asking if they were the spicy kind, with the tone of someone discussing biochemical weapons. And there, positioned at the unofficial head of the gathering like a mayor at a ribbon cutting, stood Richard Vance. Richard was president of the Ridgemont Heights Homeowners Association, a position he'd held for 6 years and wielded like a scepter. He was 53, silver-haired in that way that looked distinguished rather than old, and he smiled constantly, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, khakis with a knife-edge crease, and deck shoes that had never seen a deck. Ethan didn't like Richard. More accurately, Ethan didn't trust Richard, which was a different thing entirely. In his experience, people who smiled that much were usually hiding something. "Ethan, sweetheart, you look like you're at a funeral." Jennifer Henderson materialized at his elbow, wine spritzer sloshing dangerously. "This is supposed to be fun." "Fun? Remember fun?" "Vaguely," Ethan said. "I think I had some in 2019. Jennifer laughed, too loud. She was on her 3rd spritzer, which meant she was entering her aggressively friendly phase. In another hour, she'd progressed to sharing unsolicited opinions about everyone's marriages. By 9, she'd be crying about her own. "You should socialize more," Jennifer said, gesturing with her plastic cup in a way that endangered everyone within a 3-foot radius. "You're young, you're handsome. Well, you would be if you smiled occasionally. And Maya needs to see her father having a life." "I have a life. Work and parenting don't count. I mean, a life. When's the last time you went on a date?" Ethan considered lying, but Jennifer had the instincts of a bloodhound and the subtlety of a car alarm. "I'm good, thanks." "That's what I thought. You know who else never dates? Your neighbor, the mysterious Ms. Vale." Jennifer leaned in conspiratorially, dousing Ethan in wine breath and expensive perfume. 5 years she's lived here, and nobody knows anything about her. She doesn't come to meetings, doesn't participate in neighborhood events, doesn't even wave when you see her. It's weird, right? Don't you think it's weird? Ethan glanced across the circle to the house Jennifer was subtly, which is to say, not at all subtly, pointing at. 2247 Maple Grove Circle was a craftsman-style home, impeccably maintained with a garden that looked professionally tended and curtains that were always drawn. He'd lived 3 doors down for 2 years and had maybe seen the owner a dozen times, always at a distance, always moving with purpose from car to door or door to car. Maybe she values her privacy, Ethan said. Privacy is one thing, antisocial is another. Richard says, Jennifer, could you help me with something? Carol Winters called from the dessert table, her voice carrying the particular shrill quality of someone who'd been eavesdropping and didn't like what she heard. Jennifer sighed dramatically, but drifted away, leaving Ethan alone with his mediocre potato salad and the uncomfortable awareness that he'd been thinking about his reclusive neighbor more than he wanted to admit. Not in any romantic sense, he'd successfully killed that part of himself when the divorce papers were finalized, but with the kind of idle curiosity that comes from seeing someone determinedly avoiding the exact thing everyone else seems to crave. Connection, community, the illusion that any of this mattered. Maya ran past, shrieking with laughter, chasing another kid in a game that had no discernible rules. She was happy. That was what mattered. That was all that mattered. Ethan was contemplating a strategic exit when the music cut out. The sudden silence was jarring. Conversations faltered and died. People turned toward the DJ setup, where Richard Vance stood with a microphone, his smile somehow even wider and less genuine than usual. "Good evening, neighbors," Richard said, his voice booming across the circle. "I hope everyone's having a wonderful time. Before we get back to the music, I just need to address a small matter of community business." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He'd been to enough HOA meetings to know that when Richard started talking about community business in that tone, someone was about to have a very bad day. "As you all know," Richard continued, "our community standards are what make Ridgemont Heights such a desirable place to live. We maintain those standards through participation, cooperation, and mutual respect, which is why it's particularly disappointing when a resident repeatedly refuses to engage with those standards." Ethan scanned the crowd. People were confused, looking at each other, trying to figure out who Richard was talking about. Then Richard's gaze fixed on something behind Ethan, and he turned. She was standing at the very edge of the gathering, clearly having just arrived. Adriana Vale, though Ethan only knew her name from the mailbox in the HOA directory, looked like someone who'd gotten dressed specifically to avoid attention and had somehow failed spectacularly. Dark jeans, simple white shirt, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No jewelry, no makeup. And yet there was something about the way she held herself, a kind of self-possession that made her stand out like a spotlight. She'd frozen mid-step, one hand still on the wrought iron gate that led to the common area. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her weight had shifted slightly backward, as if she were calculating whether she could retreat without it being obvious. "Ms. Vale," Richard said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "How good of you to finally join us. We were just discussing community participation." The crowd had gone completely silent. Ethan could feel the collective attention swivel toward Adriana like a predator noticing prey. Adriana's jaw tightened, but her voice when she spoke was level. "I wasn't aware my presence was required." "Oh, it's not required," Richard said. "But it would be nice, wouldn't it? To know that everyone in our community is invested in maintaining our standards. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to discuss several violations that have been documented regarding your property." Ethan saw it then, the flash of something in Richard's eyes, not anger, something colder, more calculated. This wasn't about HOA violations, this was about power. "I've received no notification of any violations," Adriana said. "Haven't you? That's strange. I have documentation showing that multiple notices were sent to your address regarding landscaping non-compliance, architectural modifications made without approval, and noise complaints." Richard pulled out a folder from seemingly nowhere, holding it up like evidence at a trial. "All unanswered." "I haven't made any modifications, then perhaps we should schedule an inspection to verify that, along with addressing the ongoing concern about your property's impact on neighborhood drainage. Several residents have reported water problems that appear to originate from your lot." It was masterful, really. Each accusation was vague enough to be difficult to disprove, but specific enough to sound legitimate. And by doing it publicly, Richard had turned it into a spectacle, with Adriana as the villain and himself as the guardian of community standards. Ethan watched Adriana's face. She wasn't backing down, but she also wasn't engaging, which seemed to frustrate Richard. He wanted a reaction. He wanted her defensive or apologetic or angry, anything that would justify his aggression. "I'm happy to address any legitimate concerns," Adriana said finally, "through the proper channels. This doesn't seem like the appropriate venue, doesn't it? I think the community has a right to know when one of our neighbors is flagrantly disregarding the rules that the rest of us work hard to follow." Something inside Ethan snapped. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just moved. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Richard and Adriana, not dramatically, just enough to shift the dynamic. "Richard, you want to talk about drainage issues? I can help with that." Richard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went sharp. "Ethan, this doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does. I'm a structural engineer, drainage, grading, water management. That's literally what I do. If there's a problem, I can assess it, give you an actual technical evaluation instead of speculation." The crowd had gone electric with tension. People were leaning in, trying to hear every word. Maya was somewhere in the periphery, probably confused about why her dad was suddenly the center of attention. "We have professionals for that," Richard said. "Great. Then you won't mind if I take a look too. Independent verification, protect everyone's interests." Ethan kept his voice calm, reasonable. He wasn't picking a fight. He was just offering facts, which happened to completely undermine Richard's performance. Richard's mask slipped for just a second, a flash of genuine anger before the smile snapped back into place. "That's very generous of you, Ethan, though I have to wonder why you're so invested in defending someone you barely know." And there it was. The implication. The suggestion of impropriety. Before Ethan could respond, Adriana spoke. Her voice was quiet, but absolutely clear. Because unlike some people, he seems to value accuracy over intimidation. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face went through several interesting color variations. Then he laughed, a forced, unnatural sound. "Well, I can see we're not going to resolve this tonight. Ms. Vale, expect formal communication from the HOA regarding the inspection schedule. I'm sure we can all be civil about this." He switched the music back on. Conversation resumed, awkward and forced. People deliberately looked away, suddenly fascinated by their paper plates. Ethan turned to Adriana. Up close, he could see she was younger than he thought, maybe early 30s. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently filled with something that looked like exhausted resignation. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, well, I've seen Richard operate. He was out of line." "He usually is." They stood there for a moment, the party flowing around them like water around stones. Ethan felt acutely aware that people were watching, speculating, probably already constructing narratives about this interaction. Then Adriana did something completely unexpected. She held out her hand. "Dance with me." Ethan stared at her. "What?" "Dance with me," she repeated. "Right now, before I lose my nerve." I'm not, neither am I. But they're all watching anyway, and I'd rather give them something harmless to gossip about than let Richard control the narrative. Her hand remained extended. "Please." There were about 1,000 reasons to say no. Ethan had successfully avoided dancing at every social function for the past 3 years. He didn't like being noticed. He had a daughter to think about. He didn't know this woman, but he'd also just publicly sided with her against the most powerful person in the neighborhood, so the damage to his anonymity was already done. He took her hand. The DJ was playing something slow and forgettable. Adriana led them to a spot just visible enough to be seen, but not so central as to be a spectacle. She kept a respectful distance, one hand in his, the other barely touching his shoulder. "I'm a terrible dancer," Ethan said. "Good. So am I." They moved awkwardly, half a beat off, clearly two people who had no idea what they were doing. It should have been mortifying. Instead, it was almost funny. "You didn't have to do this," Ethan said. "Yes, I did." He would have escalated. This way, it looks like we're friendly neighbors having a nice time, diffuses the whole thing. She paused. "Also, I wanted to. To dance? To not let him win, even for a minute." Ethan looked over her shoulder and caught Richard's expression. The man looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. I think it's working, Ethan said. Good. Adriana was quiet for a moment, then, he's not going to stop, you know. This was just the opening. Opening to what? Whatever he's planning, Richard doesn't do anything without an endgame. He's been circling for months, looking for an angle. She met Ethan's eyes. You should know that before you get pulled deeper into this. I'm not a damsel in distress. I'm a problem he wants to solve, and anyone who helps me becomes a problem too. What did you do to piss him off? Existed. Didn't bow. Take your pick. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I should probably tell you the truth about who I am. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. But you just put yourself in Richard's crosshairs for me. That earns you at least an explanation. The song ended. They separated, but Adriana didn't walk away. Instead, she nodded toward the edge of the gathering, away from the clusters of neighbors. Walk with me? Ethan glanced around, spotted Maya still playing with her friends, then nodded. They walked toward the small community park at the end of the circle, where picnic tables sat empty in the gathering dusk. Adriana sat on one of the tables, feet on the bench, and Ethan took a position leaning against a tree a few feet away. My name is Adriana Vale, she began. That's real, by the way, not an alias. 5 years ago, I was Adriana Mercer Vale, CEO of Meridian Global Technologies. You've probably heard of it. Ethan had. It was impossible not to. Meridian Global was one of those companies that seemed to have its fingers in everything: software, hardware, AI development, cloud infrastructure. The kind of corporation that made regular people feel vaguely uneasy about how much of their daily life it controlled. I left, Adriana continued. Walked away from all of it. The company, the money, the visibility. Well, most of the money. I kept enough to live on, which is more than most people have, so I'm not looking for sympathy. But I divested everything else, put it in a trust managed by people who know what they're doing, and came here to be nobody. Why? She laughed, but it was a sad sound. That's a longer conversation. Short version, I built something that consumed my entire life, then looked around one day and realized I had no life outside of it. No friends, no relationships, no idea who I was without the company, so I left to figure it out. And Richard found out. About 6 months ago, yeah, I don't know how. I've been careful. No social media, no public appearances, no connection to my old life. But somehow he figured it out, and ever since then he's been... She trailed off, searching for the right word. Circling, Ethan supplied. Yes. At first it was subtle, friendly overtures, invitations to dinner, questions about my background. When I didn't engage, he got more aggressive: HOA violations, noise complaints, demands for inspections. Nothing I couldn't handle individually, but collectively it's becoming a problem. Why would he care? What does he get out of harassing you? Adriana looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding how much to say. I think he wants something from me. Access, leverage, some kind of advantage. Richard's the kind of person who believes everyone has a price or a weakness, and he can't figure out mine. That bothers him, so he's trying to create one. Ethan thought about that. It tracked with everything he knew about Richard Vance. The man collected power like some people collected stamps, hoarding it for reasons that seem more about the having than the using. What are you going to do? Ethan asked. What I've been doing. Keep my head down. Wait for him to get bored or distracted. She looked at him. What are you going to do? I said I'd look at the drainage situation. I meant it. Why? You don't know me. This isn't your problem. Ethan considered that. He didn't have a good answer, at least not one that made rational sense. Maybe it was because he'd spent 3 years carefully avoiding conflict and something in him was tired of it. Maybe it was because Richard had been a low-grade irritant since Ethan moved in, and this felt like a chance to push back. Or maybe it was because he'd looked at Adriana standing there alone against a crowd and recognized something of himself. Call it professional curiosity, he said finally. If Richard's making accusations about structural issues and drainage, there should be evidence. If there's not, that's useful information. And if he retaliates, then I'll deal with it. Adriana studied him with an intensity that was slightly unnerving. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who cared more about what the neighbors think. I have a kid. I care what she thinks. Everyone else is background noise. That made Adriana smile, a real one this time. I like that philosophy. They sat in comfortable silence for a minute, watching the party wind down in the distance. Lights were coming on in houses around the circle. Parents were starting to collect children. Jennifer Henderson was now in her crying phase, being consoled by Carol Winters while her husband studiously examined his phone. I should get back, Ethan said. Maya's probably wondering where I went. Of course! Adriana stood, brushed off her jeans. Thank you. For earlier. And for this. Don't thank me yet. I haven't actually done anything. You stood up. That's more than most people do. They walked back together, separating as they reached the main gathering. Ethan found Maya immediately. She had a sixth sense for when he was trying to leave and materialized at his elbow with perfect timing. Dad, can we stay for the fireworks? There are no fireworks. But there should be. This party is boring. Ethan ruffled her hair. Come on, kid. Time to go home. Did you have fun at least? He thought about that. About Richard's public ambush. About dancing badly with a stranger. About the conversation that had just shifted the trajectory of his carefully controlled life in ways he couldn't quite predict yet. Yeah, he said. I think I did. Maya beamed at him like he'd just admitted to believing in magic. See? I told you block parties were good. They walked home together, Maya chattering about her evening while Ethan made appropriate listening noises. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the confrontation, analyzing Richard's tactics, thinking about what Adriana had said. This was just the opening. 3 days later, Ethan was proven right. He came home from work to find an official-looking envelope taped to his door. Inside was a letter from the Ridgemont Heights HOA, signed by Richard Vance in his capacity as president. Dear Mr. Cole, it has come to our attention that you have offered to conduct an unofficial inspection of the property at 2247 Maple Grove Circle. While we appreciate community involvement, please be advised that all inspections must be conducted by HOA-approved contractors to ensure objectivity and compliance with our standards. Additionally, we have received complaints regarding noise levels emanating from your property, specifically related to construction activity occurring outside of approved hours. Please review the attached community guidelines and ensure all future maintenance is conducted in accordance with HOA regulations. We value you as a member of our community and trust you will work with us to maintain the high standards that make Ridgemont Heights a desirable place to live. Sincerely, Richard Vance, President, Ridgemont Heights HOA. Ethan read it twice. The noise complaint was bullshit. He hadn't done any construction, and the only maintenance he'd performed recently was changing a light bulb. This was retaliation, pure and simple. A warning shot. He should have felt angry. Instead, he felt something else. Something that had been dormant for a long time. Clarity. Richard had made a mistake. He'd assumed Ethan was like everyone else in the neighborhood, willing to back down when pressured, unwilling to rock the boat, more interested in being left alone than standing his ground. He was half right. Ethan did want to be left alone, but he'd learned a long time ago, in the wreckage of his marriage and the aftermath of his divorce, that sometimes the only way to protect the life you'd built was to fight for it. He pulled out his phone and texted Adriana. He'd gotten her number after the block party, ostensibly to coordinate the inspection. Now he used it. Still want that drainage assessment? I'm free this weekend. Her response came within a minute. Yes, but you should know what you're getting into. I do. No, you don't. But thank you anyway. That Saturday, Ethan knocked on the door of 2247 Maple Grove Circle at 9 in the morning, carrying his professional equipment and a determination to understand exactly what Richard Vance was playing at. Adriana answered almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Up close, in the bright morning light, she looked tired. Not physically. Her appearance was as carefully put together as before, but there was something exhausted in her eyes. Come in, she said. The house was beautiful. Hardwood floors, clean lines, expensive but understated furniture. It felt less like someone lived there and more like a very high-end hotel suite. Impersonal, controlled. You want coffee before we start? Adriana asked. I'm good. Let's take a look at what we're dealing with. They spent the next 4 hours going over every inch of her property. Ethan checked the grading, examined the drainage system, inspected the foundation, reviewed the landscaping. He took measurements, photos, notes. He was thorough to the point of obsession because he knew whatever he found would be scrutinized, and he needed his conclusions to be bulletproof. Adriana watched for the first hour, then seemed to relax when she realized he actually knew what he was doing. She brought him water, pointed out areas where she'd noticed issues, asked intelligent questions that suggested she'd done some research herself. By early afternoon, Ethan had a complete picture. "Your drainage is perfect," he told her, reviewing his notes on her kitchen table. "Better than perfect, actually. Whoever designed your landscaping knew what they were doing. Water flows away from the foundation, there are multiple catch basins, the grading is textbook. If anything, your lot is improving the neighborhood drainage, not causing problems." Adriana leaned back in her chair. "So the complaints are fabricated?" "Completely. I'll stake my professional reputation on it." He paused. "There's more. I checked the county records before I came over. There haven't been any drainage complaints filed about this address. Not from neighbors, not from the city, nowhere. Which means Richard either made them up entirely or the several residents he mentioned don't actually exist. Can you prove that? I can document the hell out of it. Photos, technical analysis, county records, the works. If this goes to any kind of official proceeding, you'll win. Easily." He expected her to look relieved. Instead, she looked worried. "What?" Ethan asked. "Winning isn't always winning. Not with people like Richard." She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the perfect suburban street. "I've dealt with people like him my whole career. They don't care about being right. They care about control. You just gave me ammunition, which is good, but it also means Richard has to escalate to maintain his position. Let him escalate. We have facts. Facts don't matter when someone has power and no accountability." She turned back to him. "I'm not trying to be defeatist. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're walking into. This is going to get worse before it gets better." Ethan thought about the letter on his door, the fabricated noise complaint, the thinly veiled threat. "I know," he said. Over the next 2 weeks, he learned just how right Adriana had been. The harassment started small. More HOA letters, each one documenting increasingly absurd violations. Ethan's trash bins were 6 inches too far from the curb. His lawn was a 1/4 inch below the minimum acceptable height. A package had been left on his porch for 4 hours, creating an aesthetic disruption. He ignored them at first. Then he started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, copies of the regulations being cited. He was a meticulous person by nature, and Richard's campaign gave him something to focus his attention on besides the low-grade loneliness that had become his baseline. But the letters were just the warm-up. 2 weeks after his inspection of Adriana's property, Ethan came home to find a notice from the city on his door. An anonymous complaint had been filed regarding unpermitted structural modifications to his home. An inspector would be visiting within 10 business days to investigate. That one actually worried him, not because he'd done anything wrong, he hadn't made any modifications, but because city inspections could be thorough, time-consuming, and expensive if they decided to go down rabbit holes. He texted Adriana. "City inspection. Anonymous complaint about unpermitted work. You? Got the same notice yesterday? Coincidence? No such thing." He called the city the next morning, trying to get more information about the complaint. The clerk was sympathetic, but unhelpful. Anonymous complaints were taken seriously. The inspection would proceed as scheduled. He could be present if he wanted, which was strongly recommended. Ethan took the day off work. The inspector was a middle-aged woman named Gloria who looked like she'd seen every type of homeowner bullshit and was immune to all of it. She spent 3 hours going through his house with a clipboard, checking permits, examining walls, testing outlets. "You know why you're really here," Ethan said finally, watching her inspect his bathroom for the 3rd time. Gloria looked at him over her reading glasses. "I know someone filed a complaint, that's all I know. The complaint is bogus, I haven't modified anything. This is HOA retaliation. That's between you and your HOA. I'm just here to verify compliance with building codes." She finished her inspection around 2 in the afternoon. Everything was fine, no violations, no unpermitted work. She filled out her report, had Ethan sign it, and left. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like confirmation of exactly what kind of fight this was going to be. He went to Adriana's house that evening without calling first. She answered the door in workout clothes, hair damp, clearly having just finished some kind of exercise. "Inspection go okay?" she asked. "Clean? You?" Same. Which means Richard wasted city resources on a vendetta and accomplished nothing except pissing both of us off. She stepped aside. Come in. I was about to open wine. Her kitchen was immaculate, all clean surfaces and carefully organized spaces. She poured 2 glasses of red without asking if he wanted any, handed him one, and leaned against the counter. We need to talk about Endgame, she said. What do you mean? I mean, Richard is escalating and we're responding, but we're not playing offense. We're just defending. That doesn't win wars. She took a sip of wine. I know how this plays out. He keeps pushing until we make a mistake or get tired or something in our lives creates a vulnerability he can exploit. Then he crushes us. That's his pattern. You've researched him. Of course I have. After he started targeting me, I did what I do best. I gathered information. Richard has been HOA president for 6 years. In that time, at least 8 families have moved out of Ridgemont Heights following disputes with the HOA. 3 of those families ended up in protracted legal battles. All 3 lost. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why do they lose? Because Richard has the HOA bylaws memorized, a lawyer on retainer, and absolutely no compunction about burying people in paperwork and legal fees until they give up. He doesn't win because he's right. He wins because he has more resources and more willingness to make people's lives miserable. You have resources. I do. But I can't use them without revealing who I am. And the moment I do that, this stops being about HOA violations and becomes about a billionaire trying to throw her weight around. The optics are terrible, and Richard will absolutely weaponize them. She set down her wine glass. I need to be strategic, which means I need to figure out what he actually wants. You said he wants leverage. I think so. But leverage to what end? That's the part I can't figure out. It's not money. He makes decent money from his actual job, and the HOA president position is unpaid. It's not power in a traditional sense. Ridgemont Heights HOA president isn't exactly a stepping stone to political office. So what is it? Ethan thought about Richard, about the way he smiled, about the careful performance of every interaction. Control, Ethan said. He gets off on it. Having power over people, making them jump through hoops. It's not about achieving anything specific. It's about the feeling of being able to make things happen. Adriana considered that. You might be right, which is actually worse. Why? Because if he wanted something concrete, we could negotiate. Find a solution that gives him what he needs. But if it's just about control, she trailed off. Then the only way to stop him is to remove his ability to exercise that control, which means going after the source of his power. The HOA presidency. Right. But there's a problem. Elections are annual, and he's won every single one since he took office, usually unopposed. Why? Because it's a thankless job that takes time and energy, and nobody wants to do it. Richard wants to do it. That makes him the default choice. She picked up her wine again. We could run someone against him, but we'd need support from other homeowners, and right now everyone's too scared of him to stick their necks out. They fell into silence, both thinking through scenarios. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the kitchen in long shadows. There's another option, Ethan said slowly. We don't go after him directly, we make him irrelevant. How? By fixing the actual problems in the neighborhood ourselves. If people see that things can get done without Richard orchestrating everything, it undermines his position, makes him less essential. Adriana looked at him thoughtfully. That's actually not a terrible idea. Guerrilla community service. Plus, it gives us a reason to talk to other homeowners, build relationships, figure out who else Richard has been targeting. You think there are others? I know there are. Jennifer Henderson mentioned something at the block party about the Chens getting citations for garden gnomes. The Patels got dinged for a religious decoration on their porch. Carol Winters had to take down her bird feeder because it was attracting wildlife. Ethan ticked them off on his fingers. That's just what I've heard casually. If we actually ask around, I bet we find a pattern. Adriana's expression shifted. She looked energized for the first time since he'd met her. We build a coalition. Quietly. Nothing that looks organized, just neighbors helping neighbors. But if enough people start seeing Richard as the problem instead of the solution, then he loses his power base. She smiled. You're smarter than you look. Thanks, I think. They spent the next hour planning. Small things first. helping the elderly couple on the corner with yard work, organizing a neighborhood cleanup, maybe starting a block watch program that actually did something besides make people feel paranoid. It felt good to have a plan, to be moving forward instead of just reacting. Ethan left around 9, walking home through the quiet streets of Ridgemont Heights. Lights were on in most houses. Families having dinner, watching TV, living their lives, oblivious to the small war brewing in their midst. Maya was at a sleepover, which meant Ethan had the house to himself. He should have been relieved. Alone time was precious. But instead, he felt restless. Keyed up. He pulled out his phone and looked at his conversation with Adriana. They'd been texting regularly, mostly about Richard and strategy, but occasionally about other things. She'd asked about Maya. He'd asked about her life before Ridgemont Heights. The conversations were careful, both of them maintaining appropriate boundaries, but there was something there. Not romance. He was absolutely certain it wasn't that. Something else. Recognition, maybe. The understanding of two people who'd both built walls and were surprised to find them less necessary than expected. He was overthinking it. That's what happens when you spent too much time alone with your own thoughts. His phone buzzed. Text from Adriana. Thank you for tonight, for helping with this. I know it's not your problem. He started to type something dismissive, then stopped. She deserved honesty. It became my problem when Richard sent that letter. Also, I don't like bullies. Never have. Still. You could have walked away. So could you. Touché. A pause, then another text. Maya's lucky to have you. Ethan stared at that for a long moment, feeling something complicated and uncomfortable in his chest. He wasn't used to people seeing his parenting as anything other than adequate. After his ex-wife left, the prevailing narrative had been sympathy tinged with judgment. Poor single dad, doing his best. Such a shame. Nobody seemed to consider that maybe he was good at it, that maybe he and Maya were better off this way. Thanks, she's a good kid. Makes it easy. He put the phone down and went to bed, but sleep was elusive. His mind kept circling back to Richard, to the escalating pattern, to the nagging feeling that they were missing something. The next morning brought clarity in the worst possible way. Ethan was halfway through his coffee when someone knocked on his door. Official, authoritative knocking. He opened it to find 2 city officials, both carrying clipboards, both wearing expressions that suggested they were about to ruin his day. Ethan Cole? That's me. We're with the City Building and Safety Division. We have an emergency order to vacate this property pending resolution of multiple code violations that present immediate health and safety hazards. Ethan's brain stuttered. What? The taller official, his badge said Rodriguez, handed Ethan a sheaf of papers. You have 24 hours to remove yourself and any dependents from the premises. The property will be red tagged until all violations are addressed and a final inspection is completed. Ethan looked at the papers. They were dense with legal language and technical citations, but the gist was clear. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that his house had serious structural problems, electrical hazards, and water damage that made it unsafe to occupy, all of which was complete fiction. This is insane, Ethan said. I just had a city inspection 2 weeks ago. Everything was fine. That was a different type of inspection, Rodriguez said. This complaint alleges issues that weren't covered in the previous scope. What issues specifically? Rodriguez consulted his clipboard. Foundation cracking, substandard wiring in multiple rooms, evidence of mold remediation performed without permits, and drainage problems affecting neighboring properties. Every single item was exactly the kind of technical issue that would sound plausible to a layperson, but would require expensive testing and expert evaluation to definitively disprove. Which meant, even though Ethan knew it was all bullshit, fighting it would take time and money and bureaucratic navigation. Richard had escalated, all right. From annoyance to actual threat. I'm a structural engineer, Ethan said, keeping his voice level through sheer force of will. I can provide professional documentation that none of these issues exist. That's great. You can submit that documentation as part of your appeal, but until the investigation is complete, the vacate order stands. Rodriguez actually looked sympathetic. I'm sorry. I know this is disruptive, but we have to take complaints about health and safety seriously. They left him with the paperwork and instructions for filing an appeal. Ethan stood in his doorway, holding the stack of papers, trying to process what had just happened. He had 24 hours to find somewhere else to live. Maya was at a sleepover now, but she'd be home tomorrow afternoon. He'd have to tell her they couldn't stay in their house, that they'd be displaced for who knew how long while he fought to prove what he already knew, that this was all manufactured bullshit designed to force him out. His phone rang. Adriana. "You got it too," she said without preamble. "Vacate order? 30 minutes ago. Same bullshit allegations, same timeline." Her voice was tight with anger. He's not even trying to be subtle anymore. "Where are you going to go?" "Hotel, probably. I can afford it. What about you?" Ethan thought about his bank account, about Maya's school schedule, about the fact that his entire life was set up around the routines and systems he'd built in this house, and displacing all of that would be like tearing up roots. "I'll figure something out," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." Silence on the line. Then, "Stay here." "What?" "Stay here, both of you. I have 3 bedrooms and they're all empty. You can't live in a hotel with a 7-year-old for an indefinite period. It's not practical." Before he could protest, she continued, "This isn't charity, it's strategy. We're both targets. It makes sense to consolidate, pool resources. Plus, if Richard is trying to isolate us, the worst thing we can do is play into that." Ethan's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't take help easily, didn't like owing people, didn't want to disrupt Maya's life more than it already was being disrupted. But he also wasn't an idiot. Adriana was right. A hotel wasn't practical, and his other options were limited. His parents were in Arizona. He had a couple of friends, but none he was close enough with to impose on for potentially weeks. "Temporary," he said finally, "until I get this sorted out. Of course, and I pay rent." "Ethan, those are my terms. Otherwise I'll figure something else out." He could almost hear her weighing whether to argue. Then, "Fine. Nominal rent. We'll work out the details later. Can you be here by tomorrow afternoon?" "Yeah, I'll need to pack some stuff, coordinate with Maya's school. Do what you need to do. I'll have the guest rooms ready." After they hung up, Ethan sat on his couch and tried to organize his thoughts into something resembling a plan. Pack essentials. File the appeal immediately. Contact a lawyer to understand his options. Tell Maya in a way that didn't scare her but also didn't minimize what was happening. He was still sitting there when his phone buzzed again. Text from an unknown number. "Your daughter deserves better than a father who picks fights he can't win. Drop this before it gets worse." Ethan stared at the message. Then he screenshot it, saved it, and added it to the folder he'd been building of all of Richard's moves. Because that's where they were now. Direct threats. Using his daughter as leverage. Richard had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed Ethan's first priority was avoiding conflict. He was wrong. Ethan's first priority was protecting Maya, and Richard had just threatened her. The fight had just become personal. Ethan stood in his living room at 6 the next morning, surrounded by hastily packed boxes, and the surreal awareness that his carefully constructed life had just been dismantled in less than 24 hours. Maya sat on the couch in her pajamas, eating cereal and watching him with the particular intensity that 7-year-olds reserved for moments when adults were clearly losing their grip. "So we're moving?" she asked around a mouthful of Cheerios. "Temporarily, just until I fix some things with the house." "What things?" Ethan had spent most of the night figuring out how to explain this without either lying or terrifying her. "There's a problem with some paperwork. The city thinks there might be issues with the house that need to be checked out. It's complicated and boring, but it means we can't stay here for a little while." "How long?" "I don't know yet." Maya processed this with the pragmatic efficiency of a kid who'd already learned that sometimes adults didn't have answers. "Where are we going?" "You remember Ms. Vale from 3 doors down? The lady you danced with at the block party?" Of course she'd noticed that. "Yeah, she has extra rooms and offered to let us stay there while this gets sorted out." Maya's eyes went wide. "We're going to live in her house, the one nobody ever goes in?" "It's just a house, Maya. And yes, temporarily." "Is she nice?" Ethan thought about Adriana, about the exhaustion in her eyes and the careful way she moved through the world, and the fact that she'd offered her home to near strangers because Richard Vance had backed them both into corners. "Yeah, I think she is." "Okay." Maya returned to her cereal like they'd just discussed the weather. Then, without looking up, "Is this because of Mr. Vance?" Ethan's hand stilled on the box he was taping. "Why would you think that?" Because Emma Henderson said her mom said Mr. Vance makes people leave when he doesn't like them, and you talked back to him at the party. She looked up, her expression far too serious for her age. Did we do something wrong? The question hit him harder than the vacate order had. This was what Richard's campaign actually cost. Not just displacement and inconvenience, but the casual destruction of a child's sense that the world operated on fair principles. He sat down next to Maya, took the cereal bowl gently from her hands, and met her eyes. No, we didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Vance is acting like a bully, and sometimes bullies have power they shouldn't have. But that doesn't make them right. So what are you going to do? I'm going to prove he's wrong, and I'm going to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Maya considered that. Then she picked up her cereal bowl and said, Good. I don't like him. He smiles weird. Despite everything, Ethan laughed. Yeah, he really does. They finished packing by noon. Ethan had filed his appeal with the city first thing that morning, attached his engineering credentials and preliminary documentation, and requested an expedited review. He'd also called a lawyer, someone he'd worked with on previous construction projects, who specialized in municipal law. The consultation had been expensive and not particularly encouraging. The appeals process could take weeks, maybe months if Richard found ways to complicate it. At 1:30, Ethan loaded the last box into his car while Maya sat in the passenger seat, clutching her favorite stuffed animal and looking smaller than usual. He took one last look at his house, their house, with its stupid red tag on the door declaring it uninhabitable, and felt something crystallize in his chest. Richard had miscalculated. He'd thought the vacate order would break Ethan's will to fight. Instead, it had eliminated any remaining hesitation about exactly how far Ethan was willing to go. Adriana was waiting on her porch when they pulled up. She'd changed since he'd last seen her, jeans and a simple sweater, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, less defended. Hi, she said, coming down the steps. You must be Maya. Maya, who'd been shy in the car, rallied her manners. Hi, Ms. Vale. Thank you for letting us stay in your house. You're welcome, and you can call me Adriana if you want. She glanced at Ethan. Let me help with the boxes. They made several trips, carrying everything into the guest wing that Adriana had prepared. 2 bedrooms connected by a shared bathroom, both furnished with the same impersonal hotel aesthetic as the rest of the house. Clean, comfortable, devoid of personality. Maya claimed the smaller room immediately, pronouncing it perfect, with the authority of someone who'd just been given exactly what she wanted. Ethan took the larger one, already calculating how to make this work with his job and Maya's school schedule and the general logistics of living in someone else's space. I cleared out drawers in both rooms, Adriana said, standing in the hallway between them. Bathroom stocked. Kitchen is open access. Help yourself to whatever. I'm not much of a cook, so I usually order in, but there's basics if you need them. We'll stay out of your way, Ethan said. You don't have to. This is your home too, for now. She looked uncomfortable saying it, like the words didn't quite fit her mouth. I mean that. I know this is weird, but we're in it together, so we might as well make it work. Maya appeared in her doorway, already having unpacked her stuffed animals onto the bed. Do you have any games? Adriana blinked. Games? Like board games, or cards. Dad's terrible at cards, but he tries really hard. I am not terrible, Ethan protested. You lost to me 5 times in a row last week. You cheat. I'm strategic. Adriana smiled, and it transformed her face entirely. I might have some things in the closet. Want to look? She led Maya off on an exploration while Ethan finished unpacking, listening to their voices drift back from the other part of the house. Maya asking questions in her relentless way, Adriana answering with careful politeness that gradually warmed into something approaching ease. By the time he emerged, they'd set up an elaborate game of Sorry on the dining room table and were deep into competitive play. Adriana was actually laughing at something Maya said. Her guard completely dropped, and for a moment Ethan saw what she must have been like before whatever had driven her to abandon a billion-dollar empire and hide in suburban anonymity. Dad, come play, Maya demanded. I should start looking at appeal documentation. 20 minutes won't kill you, Adriana said. Besides, Maya says you're terrible at games. I want to verify this claim. He was terrible at games. He lost spectacularly to both of them, which delighted Maya to no end and seemed to genuinely surprise Adriana. You're not even trying. Adriana accused after his third consecutive failure to make a strategic move. I'm terrible at multitasking, can only think about one thing at a time. What are you thinking about now? How to dismantle Richard Vance's entire operation without it taking 6 months. The lightness drained from the room. Maya, sensing the shift, started cleaning up the game pieces without being asked. Adriana watched her for a moment, then looked at Ethan. After dinner, she said quietly, we'll talk strategy. Dinner was takeout Thai food eaten at the kitchen island, while Maya narrated her entire day in the exhaustive detail only children could muster. She'd decided she liked Adriana, which she announced with characteristic bluntness. You're not what I expected, Maya said. What did you expect? Adriana asked. Someone scary? Emma Henderson said you never talk to anyone and her mom thinks you're probably in witness protection. Ethan nearly choked on his pad thai. Maya. It's fine, Adriana said, though she looked like she was trying not to laugh. I'm not in witness protection, just private. Why? Because I used to have a job where everyone wanted something from me all the time. It was exhausting, so now I live quietly and people mostly leave me alone. Except Mr. Vance. Except him, yeah. Maya nodded sagely, like this confirmed everything she'd suspected about the world. Dad says he's a bully. Your dad's right. Are you going to stop him? Adriana met Maya's eyes with surprising directness. We're going to try. After Maya went to bed, Ethan and Adriana reconvened in her living room with laptops, legal documents, and the growing file of Richard's harassment campaign spread across the coffee table. I talked to my lawyer today, Ethan said. The appeal process is going to take time. Minimum 3 weeks, possibly longer if Richard files counter-documentation. He will, I know. Which means we need a parallel strategy, something that puts pressure on him while the official channels grind forward. Adriana pulled up a document on her laptop. I've been researching HOA law. There's an interesting provision in our bylaws about emergency board meetings. If 20% of homeowners request one, the board has to convene within 7 days. Okay, how does that help us? Oh, because emergency meetings can address issues of board misconduct. If we can get enough homeowners to request a meeting specifically to review Richard's recent actions, we force everything into the open, make him defend his decisions in front of the community. Ethan thought about that. We'd need 14 homeowners to sign on. That's a lot of doors to knock on. I know, and most people are scared of Richard. But here's the thing. I don't think we're his only targets. She clicked through to another document. I pulled HOA meeting minutes for the past 3 years. There's a pattern. Someone raises a concern or questions Richard's authority, and within weeks they start getting violation notices. Some of them fight it. Most don't. But every single person who's challenged him has ended up either backing down or leaving the neighborhood. How many people total? 11 families that I can document, probably more that I can't. Ethan felt something cold and clarifying settle over him. This wasn't just about him and Adriana. This was systematic, a pattern of abuse that had been operating for years while everyone looked away. We need to talk to them, he said, the ones who are still here. Build a case that this isn't isolated incidents, but a coordinated campaign of harassment. It's risky. If Richard finds out we're organizing, he already knows we're organizing. The vacate orders prove that. He's trying to shut us down before we can build momentum. Ethan leaned forward. We can either hide and hope he gets bored, or we can go on offense. Force him to react to us instead of the other way around. Adriana studied him. You're angry. I'm practical. No, you're angry. I can see it. She closed her laptop. That text he sent you about Maya. That changed something. Ethan didn't bother denying it. I've spent 3 years trying to build a stable life for my daughter. Routine, predictability, safety. And in one day, Richard destroyed all of that because I had the audacity to stand up to him at a block party. So yeah, I'm angry. But anger's useful if you channel it right. Spoken like someone who's done this before. Not exactly. But I learned a long time ago that you can either let people push you around or you can push back. There's no middle ground with bullies. Adriana was quiet for a moment. Then, my company. Before I left, there was a board member who tried to stage a coup. He spent months building alliances, undermining my authority, positioning himself to take over. I didn't see it coming until it was almost too late. What did you do? I went nuclear, exposed every unethical thing he'd ever done, burned every bridge he had, and made sure he never worked in tech again. She looked down at her hands. It worked. I kept control. But the process destroyed something in me, made me realize how much of my life was just power games and positioning. That's when I started planning my exit. You think this is the same thing. I think Richard is playing the same game. And I think if we're not careful, fighting him will cost us more than losing to him would. Ethan shook his head. I don't accept that. Richard's power comes from fear and information asymmetry. If we expose what he's doing and give people a framework to resist, we take away his weapons. That's not the same as becoming him. You sound very certain. I am, because I have something he doesn't. What's that? Nothing to lose that I haven't already lost. Ethan gathered up the documents. My ex-wife left because she decided our life together was limiting her potential. My career is solid, but not spectacular. I own a house I can't currently live in and have exactly one person in the world who depends on me. Richard can't threaten any of that effectively. He can inconvenience me. He can make things difficult. But he can't actually destroy my life because the things I care about aren't things he can touch. Adriana looked at him with something that might have been respect. That's either very zen or very depressing. Little of both, probably. They worked until almost midnight, mapping out approach strategies and identifying which neighbors to contact first. They needed people who'd been directly targeted by Richard, who had documentation, who were angry enough to act but stable enough to be reliable. The list they came up with had 8 names. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Ethan was halfway to the guest room when Adriana called after him. Hey, thank you. For what? For not walking away. Most people would have. Most people didn't get a text threatening their kid. Still, you could have just focused on your own appeal, stayed out of the bigger fight. Ethan thought about Maya asleep in the next room, about the 3 years he'd spent building walls and avoiding conflict, about the text message that had finally pushed him past the point of strategic retreat. No, he said. I really couldn't. The next morning started with coffee and a battle plan. Adriana had early meetings. She still consulted remotely for a few select companies under a pseudonym, maintaining just enough professional engagement to keep her skills sharp. So Ethan took Maya to school and then spent the day making calls. The first 3 conversations went poorly. People were sympathetic but unwilling to sign on to anything official. Too risky. Too much uncertainty. Richard had been president for 6 years. Who were they to challenge that? The 4th call was with David Chen, whose family had gotten cited for garden decorations 2 years ago. David listened to Ethan's pitch, asked smart questions, and then said something that changed everything. I'll sign your petition on one condition. What's that? We don't just ask for a meeting, we file a formal complaint with the county about HOA fund mismanagement. Ethan sat up straighter. What do you know about fund mismanagement? Enough to ask questions that Richard won't want to answer. My wife's an accountant. She's been looking at the HOA financial disclosures for the past year, and there are some interesting patterns. Money going to contracted services that don't seem to match actual work being done. Payments to a property management company that might be connected to Richard's family. Might be? We haven't been able to confirm it definitively, but the timing is suspicious. The company incorporated 6 months after Richard became president. They're the exclusive contractor for all HOA maintenance work, and their rates are about 30% higher than market average. Ethan felt adrenaline spike through his system. Can your wife document this? She already has. But we need more people willing to go on record questioning it. One family asking questions looks like troublemaking. Multiple families raising concerns looks like due diligence. I'll get you those families. Send me everything your wife has found. By the time Adriana got home that evening, Ethan had called 6 more homeowners and found 3 willing to sign on to both the emergency meeting request and a financial review demand. Not enough yet, but momentum was building. David Chen's wife found evidence of financial fraud, Ethan said without preamble when Adriana walked in. Richard's been funneling HOA funds to a company that's probably owned by his family. Adriana set down her bag slowly. Can she prove it? She has documentation showing the payment patterns. We'd need subpoena power to confirm ownership, but the circumstantial evidence is solid. If this is true, it's not just an HOA violation. It's criminal fraud. I know. They looked at each other across the kitchen, and Ethan saw his own thoughts reflected in Adriana's expression. This was bigger than they'd realized, more serious. If they went down this road, there was no walking it back. "We need to be sure," Adriana said finally. "Absolutely certain, because if we accuse him of fraud and we're wrong, he'll bury us legally." "Agreed. I'm meeting with David's wife tomorrow. She's going to walk me through everything she's found." Over dinner, Adriana cooking this time, which surprised both of them when the pasta actually turned out edible, they briefed Maya in age-appropriate terms about what was happening. She listened with the serious concentration she usually reserved for math homework. "So, Mr. Vance is stealing?" she asked. "We think so," Ethan said, "but we have to prove it first." "How?" "By finding evidence and showing it to people who can do something about it." Maya nodded. Then, "Can I help?" "This is grown-up stuff, sweetheart. I'm good at finding things. And people talk around kids like we're not there. I bet I could learn stuff." Adriana, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "She has a point. Kids do hear things, though I'm not sure I'm comfortable with a 7-year-old doing investigative work." "I'm almost 8, Maya corrected. "Still, what if I just listen?" Maya pressed. "Like at school, or when we're at the park. I won't do anything dangerous. I'll just pay attention and tell you if I hear anything about Mr. Vance." Ethan wanted to say no, wanted to keep Maya completely separate from this mess, but he'd also taught her to be observant and engaged with the world, and shutting that down now felt like the wrong lesson. "Okay," he said slowly, "but you only listen. You don't ask questions, you don't put yourself in any situation that feels weird, and you tell me everything even if it doesn't seem important. Deal?" "Deal." Adriana caught his eye across the table, and he could see she wasn't entirely convinced this was a good idea. Neither was he. But they were running out of conventional options. The next afternoon, Ethan met with Sarah Chen at a coffee shop halfway across town, neutral territory, away from Ridgemont Heights, and Richard's surveillance network. She brought a laptop and 3 years of HOA financial records. "I started looking at these after we got cited for the garden gnomes," Sarah said, pulling up spreadsheets. "It felt petty and targeted, and I wanted to understand if there was a pattern. Turns out there was." She walked Ethan through it systematically. The HOA had a healthy reserve fund when Richard took over. Over 6 years, that fund had been depleted through a series of emergency maintenance projects and contracted services. The work was supposedly done by Pinnacle Property Solutions, a company that had no website, no online presence beyond a business registration, and a mailing address that matched a UPS store. "I ran the business registration," Sarah said. "Pinnacle was incorporated by someone named Robert Vance. Richard's son? Brother, younger by 10 years. Has a history of failed business ventures and financial problems. Suddenly gets a steady stream of HOA contracts that pay premium rates for work that's either unnecessary or never actually completed." Ethan looked at the numbers. Over 6 years, Pinnacle had been paid nearly $400,000 for services ranging from drainage system maintenance to community area improvements to emergency repairs. The documentation was vague enough to be meaningless. "Has anyone questioned these payments?" "A few people have asked at meetings. Richard always has an answer, says it's competitive bidding, says Pinnacle provides specialized services, says the board approved everything through proper channels." "And the board?" "Is 3 people. Richard, his next-door neighbor who lets Richard make all decisions, and Carol Winters who just agrees with whatever Richard wants because she thinks he's protecting property values." Ethan photographed every page of Sarah's documentation, then spent an hour asking questions about specific line items and payment patterns. By the time they finished, he had a clear picture of systematic fraud that had been operating in plain sight for years. "Why didn't you take this to the authorities before?" he asked. Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Because I wasn't completely sure. And because Richard has a lawyer on retainer and we don't. The risk of being wrong felt too high. And now? Now I'm watching what he's doing to you and Adriana, and I realize he's not going to stop. Ever. Unless someone forces him to." She closed her laptop. "My husband and I are in. Whatever you need." Ethan added the Chens to his growing coalition. 9 families now, 5 more to reach the threshold for an emergency meeting. He spent the next 3 days knocking on doors, making calls, and slowly building the case. Some people slammed doors in his face. Others listened but declined to get involved. A few, the ones who'd been directly targeted and were still angry about it, signed on immediately. By Friday evening, he had 14 signatures. "We can call the meeting," he told Adriana that night. She was curled up on the couch with her laptop, Maya asleep in the guest room down the hall. It had started to feel almost normal, this domestic arrangement, almost comfortable. "Are we ready?" Adriana asked. "No, but we're never going to be completely ready. Richard will find out what we're planning the moment we file the request. He'll have a week to prepare his defense. So we need to use that week to build the strongest possible case." "I've been working on something," Adriana said. She turned her laptop around to show him a detailed presentation. A timeline of Richard's tenure as president, every family that's been targeted, every suspicious financial transaction, every pattern of retaliation against anyone who questions his authority. It was comprehensive, damning, exactly the kind of thing that would be devastating in front of a crowd. "This is good," Ethan said. "Really good. But we need one more thing." "What?" "Someone from inside his operation. Someone who's seen how he works up close and is willing to testify to it." Adriana frowned. "That's a tall order. Who's going to betray Richard publicly?" "I don't know yet, but there has to be someone. Nobody maintains that kind of control without making enemies." The answer came from an unexpected source 2 days later. Ethan was picking Maya up from school when he noticed Carol Winters in the parking lot, sitting in her car, crying. He almost kept walking. Carol had never been friendly to him, and getting involved in someone else's breakdown seemed like a terrible idea. But something about the way she was crying, with the desperate intensity of someone who'd been holding it together too long, made him stop. He knocked on her window. She looked up, startled, and for a moment he thought she'd tell him to leave. Instead, she rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, immediately realizing what a stupid question it was. "No," Carol said, "I'm really not." "Can I help?" She laughed, bitter and broken. "Unless you can turn back time and stop me from being an idiot, probably not." Maya was waiting by the school entrance, watching with concern. Ethan made a decision that was probably going to complicate everything. "Do you want to get coffee? Talk about it?" Carol stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Why would you want to do that? I've been terrible to you, to everyone." "Yeah, well, everyone's terrible sometimes. Doesn't mean you deserve to fall apart alone in a school parking lot." She considered that, then nodded. They ended up at the same coffee shop where Ethan had met with Sarah Chen, Carol clutching a latte like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Maya sat at a nearby table with a hot chocolate and a book, giving them space but staying within eyesight. "I need to tell someone," Carol said finally. "And you're probably the only person in Ridgemont Heights who might actually listen without judging." "I'm not promising no judgment," Ethan said, "but I'll listen." So she told him about how she'd supported Richard for years, believing he was protecting their property values and community standards. About how he'd gradually isolated her from other board members, made her dependent on his approval, used her vote as a rubber stamp for his decisions. About how she'd started noticing discrepancies in the financial records 6 months ago, but had been too scared to question them. "He has something on everyone," Carol said. "Some piece of information or leverage he can use if you step out of line. With me, it's my daughter. She had some problems in college, legal problems. Richard helped make them go away. And ever since then, he reminds me periodically that he could make them come back if he wanted to." Ethan felt cold settle in his stomach. "That's blackmail." "I know. But what can I do? If I go against him, he destroys my family. What if you weren't alone? What if other people were standing with you?" Carol looked at him sharply. "What are you planning?" So Ethan told her about the emergency meeting request, about the financial documentation, about the coalition of families who were done being intimidated. "We need someone from inside," Ethan said. "Someone who can speak to how Richard operates, how he uses information and fear to maintain control. That testimony would be devastating." "I can't," Carol said immediately. "I can't risk my daughter." "What if there was a way to do it that protected her? What if we had enough evidence that your testimony was just one piece, not the linchpin, but part of a larger case?" Carol was silent for a long time, staring into her latte. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I have recordings." Ethan went very still. "What kind of recordings?" "Board meetings, private conversations, times when Richard said things that contradicted what he told the community. I started recording about a year ago after I realized something was wrong but didn't know what to do about it. She looked up, eyes red. I didn't plan to use them. I just needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that the things he was saying in private were different from his public face. Will you share them? I don't know. I need to think about it. Need to figure out if I can actually go through with this. She stood up, gathering her purse. Give me a few days. I'll let you know. She left before Ethan could push further. Maya appeared at his elbow. Is she going to help? Maya asked. Maybe. I don't know. She seemed really scared. She is scared. Mr. Vance has been making her scared for a long time. Maya thought about that. Then, being brave is hard. Yeah, kid, it really is. That night, Ethan filed the formal request for an emergency HOA meeting, along with the 14 signatures required to mandate it. He sent it by certified mail to Richard's address and copied the other board members for good measure. The response came within 6 hours. Richard called Ethan's cell at 11 p.m. Ethan almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. You're making a mistake, Richard said without preamble. His voice was level, almost pleasant, which made it somehow more threatening. I don't think I am. An emergency meeting is going to accomplish nothing except embarrassing yourself and everyone who signed that ridiculous petition. I've done nothing wrong. Everything I've done as president has been by the book and for the good of the community. Then you should have no problem defending those actions in front of the community. This isn't about defending anything. This is about you being unable to accept that you violated HOA standards and are now facing consequences. You're trying to turn your personal failures into a referendum on my leadership. It's transparent and it's pathetic. Ethan felt anger spike but kept his voice even. See you at the meeting, Richard. One more thing. That daughter of yours, Maya, right? She's in 2nd grade at Brookside Elementary, Mrs. Patterson's class. Everything in Ethan went cold and sharp. Don't. I'm not threatening anyone, just noting that children learn by example. And the example you're setting right now is that it's acceptable to attack people who are just trying to do their jobs. I'd hate for Maya to grow up thinking that's how functional adults behave. You're done talking about my daughter. I'm just saying that your choices have consequences. For everyone in your life. Think about that before this goes any further. The line went dead. Ethan sat in the dark living room, hands shaking with rage. Adriana appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, clearly having heard his side of the conversation. He threatened Maya, Ethan said. I heard. I'm going to destroy him. I know. She came and sat next to him. But we do it smart. We do it with evidence and testimony and a room full of witnesses. We don't give him any excuse to claim we're the aggressors. He just threatened a 7-year-old. I know. And when we're done, everyone else will know it too. She put a hand on his arm. 1 week. We have 1 week to build an airtight case. Can you hold it together that long? Ethan took a deep breath, then another. The rage didn't dissipate, but it transformed into something colder and more useful. Yeah, he said. I can hold it together. The next 7 days were a blur of preparation. Ethan coordinated with the 14 families who'd signed the petition, making sure everyone understood their role. Sarah Chen polished her financial analysis. David Chen contacted a county investigator who specialized in HOA fraud. Adriana worked her network of former colleagues to identify a forensic accountant who could review the Pinnacle Property Solutions payments on short notice. And Carol Winters, after 4 days of agonizing deliberation, agreed to testify and provide her recordings. I'm terrified, she told Ethan, when she handed over the flash drive containing a year's worth of private conversations. But I'm more terrified of what happens if I don't do this, of what he'll do next. We'll protect you, Ethan promised, knowing he might not be able to keep that promise, but meaning it anyway. The night before the meeting, Ethan couldn't sleep. He went through his presentation for the 100th time, checking every detail, every citation, every piece of evidence. It was solid. It should be enough. But Richard had 6 years of practice manipulating the narrative. He'd have his own counter-evidence, his own explanations, his own allies in the room. This wasn't going to be a clean victory. It was going to be a war fought in front of 70 homeowners with varying levels of investment in the outcome. Around 2 a.m., he gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for water. Adriana was already there, laptop open, staring at her own presentation. Can't sleep either? She asked. Nope. We're ready. You know that, right? We've done everything we can. I know, doesn't make it easier. She closed her laptop. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's about the vacate order or protecting Maya. There's something else. Ethan thought about lying, about deflecting, but they'd been living in close quarters for 2 weeks now, and Adriana had earned honesty. My ex-wife left because she said our life was too small, he said finally. Too suburban, too predictable, too focused on routine instead of excitement. She wanted more, so she went looking for it. And you stayed. I stayed because Maya needed stability, because someone had to be the parent who showed up every day. But part of me wondered if she was right. If I'd let my world get too small. If I'd stopped fighting for things because fighting was too hard. You don't believe that anymore. I don't know what I believe, but I know that when Richard started pushing, something in me said no. Not this time. Not without a fight. He looked at Adriana. What about you? Why are you really doing this? She was quiet for a long time. Because I spent 15 years building an empire, and somewhere in that process, I forgot how to be a person. I had power and money and success, and I was completely hollow. So I left to figure out who I was without all of that. But Richard saw me as just another resource to exploit, another person to control, and I realized that I could run from my old life. But if I didn't stand up to people like him, I'd just be hollow in a different way. They sat in the comfortable silence of two people who'd found themselves in an unexpected alliance and discovered it meant more than either had anticipated. Tomorrow's going to be brutal, Adriana said. Probably. We might lose. Possibly. But at least we'll know we tried. Ethan raised his water glass. To trying. Adriana clinked her glass against his. To trying. The next evening, the Ridgemont Heights Community Center filled with every homeowner who could make it on short notice. 73 people, according to Ethan's count. The room was set up with chairs facing a small stage where the HOA board usually conducted business. Richard sat at the head table with his two board members, looking calm and confident. Ethan and Adriana sat in the front row with their coalition, Sarah and David Chen. Carol Winters, looking like she might be sick. The other families who'd been targeted over the years, all of them waiting. Richard called the meeting to order with his characteristic smile. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know an emergency meeting is unusual, but some of our neighbors felt it was necessary to address concerns about HOA management. We take all feedback seriously, so let's hear what they have to say. His tone was magnanimous, dismissive, like he was indulging children. Ethan stood up. Thank you, Richard. We'll try to be brief. He walked to the front of the room, connected his laptop to the projector, and began. He started with the personal stories. Families who'd been targeted, violations that made no sense, escalating harassment that forced people from their homes. One by one, neighbors stood and shared their experiences, and a pattern emerged that was impossible to deny. Then Sarah Chen presented the financial analysis. The payments to Pinnacle Property Solutions, the depleted reserve fund, the questionable billing practices. Richard interrupted multiple times, trying to derail the presentation with procedural objections and demands for evidence verification. But Ethan had anticipated this. Every claim was documented. Every number was sourced. Finally, Carol Winters stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I've been on the board for 4 years, she said, and I've watched Richard manipulate every decision, silence every dissent, and use personal information to blackmail anyone who questions him. I have recordings of private conversations that prove it, and I'm done being complicit. She played 3 clips. Richard discussing how to handle a homeowner who'd questioned a budget decision. Richard explicitly stating that he'd use Carol's daughter's legal problems against her if she didn't vote his way. Richard laughing about the vacate orders against Ethan and Adriana, calling it teaching them a lesson. The room erupted. The sound in the community center was like nothing Ethan had ever heard. 70 people all reacting at once, voices rising in disbelief and anger and vindication. Someone shouted, "I knew it!" while another voice called for Richard's immediate resignation. The board member sitting next to Richard, his neighbor Tom, who'd rubber-stamped everything for 6 years, had gone pale and was staring at the table like it might provide escape. Richard stood up, and the movement was enough to cut through some of the noise. His smile was gone, replaced by something harder and more calculating. This is outrageous, he said, his voice cutting across the chaos. These recordings were made without my consent, which makes them inadmissible. This isn't a court of law, Adriana said, standing up from her seat. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. This is a community meeting, and we're allowed to hear evidence of how our HOA president has been operating. Evidence that's been selectively edited and taken out of context. Then explain the context, Ethan said. Explain what context makes it acceptable to blackmail a board member, or to laugh about forcing families out of their homes. Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time since Ethan had known him, the man looked genuinely rattled, but he recovered fast. I've dedicated 6 years to this community, Richard said, addressing the room now instead of Ethan. 6 years of volunteering my time, managing budgets, dealing with complaints, making difficult decisions that nobody else wanted to make. And this is what I get? A witch hunt led by 2 people who moved in yesterday and think they can tear down everything I've built? We're not tearing down anything, Sarah Chen said, standing up. We're asking you to account for $400,000 in payments to a company owned by your brother. That's not a witch hunt. That's basic financial oversight. Pinnacle Property Solutions was hired through proper competitive bidding. There was no competitive bidding, David Chen interrupted. I pulled the meeting minutes. Pinnacle was approved as an emergency contractor during a special session where only you and Tom were present. Carol was out of town. There was no vote. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Richard said it was urgent. Everything's urgent with Richard, someone called from the back. Ethan turned and saw it was Marcus Peterson, one of the families who'd been driven out 3 years ago but had apparently heard about the meeting and come back. That's how he operates. Creates a crisis, then positions himself as the only solution. The room was turning. Ethan could feel it. The careful balance of fear and compliance that had kept Richard in power was breaking down under the weight of actual evidence and collective anger. But Richard wasn't done fighting. You want to talk about conflicts of interest? Richard said, pointing at Adriana. Let's talk about who's really pulling the strings here. Adriana Vale, or should I say Adriana Mercer Vale, former CEO of Meridian Global Technologies. Billionaire who's been living in our community under false pretenses. You think she cares about HOA violations? She's using you all to wage a personal vendetta because I had the audacity to hold her to the same standards as everyone else. The room went quiet. People turned to look at Adriana, and Ethan saw her face go carefully blank. This was the revelation she'd been dreading, the moment her past caught up with her carefully constructed anonymity. That's not... Adriana started, but Richard cut her off. She's a corporate raider who destroyed competitors and manipulated markets for profit. Now she's doing the same thing here, but instead of hostile takeovers, she's orchestrating hostile meetings. And you're all falling for it. Ethan felt rage building in his chest, but before he could respond, someone else spoke up. So what if she's rich? It was Jennifer Henderson, of all people, standing up with her characteristic lack of filter. I'd rather have a rich person who treats people decently than you using HOA bylaws like weapons. At least she's not stealing from us. I haven't stolen anything. Then where's the drainage system you charged us $40,000 to repair? Jennifer demanded. Because my basement still floods every spring, and I'm pretty sure Pinnacle never actually did the work. Other voices joined in, people who'd paid special assessments for improvements that never materialized. Families who'd been cited for violations while Richard's friends got away with worse. 6 years of accumulated grievances spilling out in a cascade that Richard couldn't interrupt or redirect. Ethan caught Adriana's eye. She looked shaken but resolute. He gave her a small nod, keep going, and she straightened her shoulders. Richard's right about one thing, Adriana said, her voice cutting through the noise again. I am Adriana Mercer Vale. I did run Meridian Global. And I left all of that because I was tired of people seeing me as a resource to exploit instead of a person. I came here to be anonymous, to live a normal life. She paused. But Richard couldn't let that happen, because to him, everyone is either an asset or a threat. And when I wouldn't play his games, I became a threat he needed to eliminate. That's a very nice story, Richard said, very sympathetic. But it doesn't change the fact that you've been lying to this community since you moved in. I didn't lie. I just didn't advertise my background, which is my right. Adriana's voice got harder. What's not your right is using HOA authority to harass people, to fabricate violations, to force families from their homes because they questioned your decisions. I forced nobody. You forced us, Ethan said quietly. The room went silent again, all attention shifting to him. You issued a vacate order based on fabricated complaints about my house, complaints that your own city inspector found to be completely baseless. You did the same thing to Adriana, and based on what we've heard tonight, you've done it to at least 8 other families over the past 6 years. He pulled up a new slide on the projector, a timeline. Every family that had left Ridgemont Heights during Richard's tenure, with dates and documented violations that preceded their departure. This is a pattern, Ethan said. Not isolated incidents, not legitimate enforcement. A systematic campaign to eliminate anyone who challenges your authority. Richard's lawyer, Ethan hadn't even noticed the man arrive, stood up from the back of the room. My client has done nothing illegal. HOA enforcement is within his purview as president. If people don't like how he exercises that authority, they're free to vote him out during regular elections. We're not waiting for regular elections, David Chen said. We're calling for an immediate vote of no confidence. The bylaws allow it with a 2/3 majority. The lawyer looked at Richard, who'd gone very still. This was the move they hadn't anticipated, the nuclear option. You don't have 2/3, Richard said flatly. Let's find out, Ethan replied. The next 20 minutes were procedural chaos. Richard's lawyer tried to argue that a vote of no confidence required advance notice. David Chen countered with the exact bylaw provision allowing emergency votes when fraud or malfeasance was alleged. The lawyer demanded to see the financial evidence. Sarah Chen had copies ready to distribute. Through it all, Richard sat at the head table, his expression shifting from confident to concerned to something approaching panic. He was losing control of the room, and everyone could see it. Finally, the vote was called. A show of hands for removing Richard Vance as HOA president, effective immediately. Ethan watched hands go up across the room. The families who'd been directly targeted, obviously, but also people who'd just been tired of the atmosphere of fear. People who'd stayed quiet for years but had apparently been waiting for someone else to go first. When the count was done, it wasn't even close. 52 votes for removal, 15 against, 6 abstentions. Richard stood up slowly. His face had gone red, his hands gripping the edge of the table. This is a mistake, all of you. You have no idea what you're doing. Running an HOA isn't a popularity contest. It requires discipline, standards, someone willing to make hard decisions. We're done with your decisions, Carol Winters said quietly. She was still shaking, but her voice was steady. I'm resigning from the board, effective immediately. I should have done this a year ago. Tom, Richard's neighbor, raised his hand tentatively. I'd also like to resign. I didn't know about a lot of this. I thought I was just helping. Richard looked at them both with undisguised contempt. Cowards. You're all cowards. No, Adriana said. They're just done being afraid of you. Richard grabbed his papers, shoved them in his briefcase, and walked toward the exit. But he stopped at the door, turned back to face the room. You think this is over? He said. You think you've won something? I'll be back, with lawyers, with lawsuits. I'll tie this community up in legal proceedings for years. And when I'm done, every single person who voted against me tonight will regret it. He left. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the frame. The room erupted again, but this time it was different. Not anger or shock, but relief. People talking over each other, some laughing, others looking stunned. Jennifer Henderson was openly crying and hugging Carol Winters. The Peterson family was shaking hands with David Chen. Ethan felt hands on his shoulder and turned to find neighbors he'd barely spoken to thanking him, telling him they'd known something was wrong but hadn't known what to do about it, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. Adriana was having similar conversations on the other side of the room, though hers were more awkward. People didn't quite know how to process the billionaire revelation, and she clearly didn't know how to manage being visible again after years of hiding. Eventually, someone called for order. They needed to elect an interim board, establish a financial review process, and figure out next steps. The meeting stretched on for another 2 hours, gradually shifting from drama to logistics. By the time it ended, a new 3-person interim board had been established. David Chen, Sarah Chen, and Marcus Peterson. Their first order of business would be a complete financial audit and a review of all active violation cases. Ethan's and Adriana's vacate orders would be rescinded immediately. It was past 11 when Ethan finally walked out to the parking lot with Adriana. The night air was cold, and he could see his breath. "We did it," Adriana said. She sounded dazed. "We did. I thought I'd feel more triumphant. Instead, I just feel tired." "That's because we're not done yet. Richard's going to lawyer up and make this as painful as possible. The financial investigation is going to take months, and the community is going to have a lot of healing to do." "You're really good at ruining moments, you know that?" Ethan smiled. "Sorry, I just don't want us to think the hard part's over." "But the hardest part might be," Adriana said, "the part where we were alone, where nobody believed us. That's done." They walked to their cars. They'd driven separately, some instinct making them maintain separate arrival times, even though everyone knew they were working together. Ethan was about to get in when Adriana called his name. "Thank you," she said, "for standing up at that block party, for not walking away, for being stubborn enough to see this through. Thank you for giving me a place to stay when I needed it, for being willing to fight alongside me. We make a good team." "Yeah, we really do." The next morning, Ethan woke up to his phone ringing at 7. It was the city inspector, Gloria. "Mr. Cole, I'm calling to inform you that the vacate order on your property has been officially rescinded. The complaints that triggered the inspection have been determined to be unfounded. You're cleared to move back in whenever you're ready." Ethan should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something more complicated. "Thank you. I appreciate you letting me know. For what it's worth, I'm glad this worked out. I've seen HOA disputes get ugly, but this was something else." She paused. "The county's opening an investigation into the Pinnacle Property Solutions payments. Someone from the fraud division will probably want to talk to you." After hanging up, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed in Adriana's guest room and tried to process the fact that he could go home. That the crisis that had upended his life 3 weeks ago was, at least officially, resolved. Maya appeared in his doorway, already dressed for school. "Was that about our house?" "Yeah, we can move back in." "When?" "Whenever we want, I guess." Maya looked at him with that too perceptive expression she got sometimes. "Do you want to move back?" It was a fair question. 3 weeks ago, moving into Adriana's house had felt like a temporary emergency measure. But somewhere in the chaos of coalition building and emergency meetings and late-night strategy sessions, it had started feeling like something else. Not permanent exactly, but not unwelcome either. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "What about you?" "I like it here," Maya said simply. "Adriana's nice, and she's teaching me chess. Real chess, not the version where you let me win." "I don't let you win. Dad, you're terrible at lying," he laughed. "Okay, fair, but this is her house. We can't just stay here forever." "Why not? She has the space, and I think she likes having us here." "It's complicated. Adults always say that when they don't want to make a decision. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. Ethan ruffled her hair. "Go eat breakfast. I'll figure it out." He found Adriana in the kitchen, already dressed for the day, making coffee with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she hadn't slept well. "City called," Ethan said. "Vacate orders rescinded." Adriana's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "That's good. That's great." "Yeah." They stood in awkward silence. Finally, Adriana said, "You don't have to rush out. If you need time to clean the house, get things ready." "I appreciate that. But I also don't want to overstay our welcome." "You're not. Overstaying, I mean." She poured 2 cups of coffee, handed him one. "I know this started as a necessity, but I've actually liked having you both here. Maya's good company, and you—" She trailed off. "I what?" "You're easy to be around. You don't ask invasive questions or try to fix me or act like my past defines everything about who I am now. That's rare." Ethan took a sip of coffee to buy himself time. He wasn't good at this kind of conversation, wasn't good at navigating the space between practical arrangement and something more personal. "I've liked being here too," he said finally, "but I need to think about what's best for Maya long term. Stability, routine, not disrupting her life more than it's already been disrupted." "Of course. That makes sense. Give me a few days to clean up my house, make sure everything's actually okay, figure out logistics. Take as long as you need." The next week was strange. Ethan spent his days at his own house, cleaning and organizing and gradually moving their things back. But he and Maya still came to Adriana's for dinner most nights. It had become habit, the three of them around her kitchen table, talking about their days, Maya narrating her latest school drama, Adriana teaching her chess strategies while Ethan pretended not to be charmed by the whole thing. The community was healing, slowly. The interim board had started the financial audit and found exactly what they'd suspected: years of fraudulent billing and misappropriated funds. The county investigation was moving forward. Richard had made good on his threat to lawyer up, but his attorney was fighting a losing battle against mountains of evidence. Several families who'd left Ridgemont Heights during Richard's tenure had reached out, asking if the hostile environment was really over. Marcus Peterson was leading an effort to rebuild community trust through regular social events that didn't require HOA approval or Richard's oversight. Ethan got pulled into a lot of it. People wanted his technical expertise for property assessments. They wanted his opinion on new HOA bylaws. They wanted to tell him their stories of how Richard had made their lives difficult and thank him for standing up. It was exhausting and gratifying in equal measure. One evening, about 10 days after the emergency meeting, Ethan was at his own house sorting through old files when someone knocked on his door. He opened it to find Carol Winters standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Carol, hi. I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to talk to you about something, and I didn't know who else to ask." He invited her in, made tea, and listened while she explained that Richard had been contacting her, not directly, through his lawyer, suggesting that her recordings might be considered illegal wiretapping, implying that she could face legal consequences for sharing them. "It's intimidation," Ethan said. "He's trying to scare you into recanting." "I know, but what if he's right? What if I did break the law?" "Did you record conversations in a public meeting space where you were a participant?" "Yes." "Then you're fine. California is a two-party consent state for private conversations, but board meetings aren't private, and you were part of the conversation." He paused. "Have you talked to a lawyer yourself?" "I can't afford—" "Adriana can, and I bet she'd be willing to cover legal consultation for anyone Richard's targeting as retaliation." He texted Adriana right there, got an immediate confirmation. 20 minutes later, Carol had contact information for an attorney who specialized in HOA law and whistleblower protection, paid for by Adriana's seemingly bottomless resources. After Carol left, looking relieved, Ethan sat in his living room and thought about how much had changed in a month. His house felt empty now, too quiet. He'd gotten used to Maya's chatter and Adriana's dry commentary and the gentle chaos of shared space. His phone buzzed. Text from Adriana. "Carol okay?" "Yeah. Scared but okay. Thanks for the lawyer hookup. Anytime. You coming for dinner?" "Maya's at a sleepover. I was going to just grab something." "Come anyway." "I made pasta." "Well, I ordered pasta and put it in nice dishes." "Close enough." Ethan smiled and texted back that he'd be there in 20 minutes. When he arrived, Adriana had the dining table set for two, candles lit, music playing softly. It looked almost like a date, which made him immediately self-conscious. "This is fancy," he said. "I'm celebrating. County investigator called today. They're filing formal charges against Richard and his brother, fraud, embezzlement, the whole thing." She poured wine. "And they're recommending that the HOA pursue a civil suit to recover the misappropriated funds." "That's huge. It means he's actually going to face consequences. Real ones. Not just losing his little kingdom." She raised her glass. "To consequences." Ethan clinked his glass against hers. "To consequences." They ate and talked about everything except Richard. Adriana asked about his work, actually seeming interested in the technical details of structural engineering. Ethan asked about her life before Meridian Global, the parts that came before corporate empires and billion-dollar valuations. "I was a weird kid," Adriana admitted. "Obsessed with computers. No social skills whatsoever. Built my first software program when I was 12 and sold it for $500. Thought I was a genius." "You kind of were." "I was lucky. Right place, right time, right obsession. The genius part came later after I'd failed enough times to actually learn something." "You don't talk about Meridian much, because it doesn't feel like my life anymore. It feels like something that happened to someone else." She swirled her wine. "But being here, dealing with Richard, it reminded me that I'm capable of more than just hiding, that I can use what I learned without becoming what I was." "Which was what?" "Ruthless. single-minded, so focused on winning that I forgot to care about the cost. She looked at him. You kept me from going back to that. When I wanted to crush Richard with money and lawyers and overwhelming force, you insisted we do it the right way, with community and evidence and people standing together. I didn't do that alone. No, but you led it. You were the one people trusted. She paused. I've been thinking about what comes next. For me, I can't keep hiding indefinitely, but I also don't want to go back to what I was. So find something in between. Like what? I don't know. You're good at solving problems and organizing complex systems. There's probably 1,000 ways to use those skills that don't require running a corporation or living in anonymity. Adriana smiled. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's doable. You just have to figure out what you actually want instead of what you're running from. They cleaned up together, falling into the easy rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Ethan washing, Adriana drying, the kitchen gradually returning to its usual pristine state. I should probably go, Ethan said when they finished. You could stay. Watch a movie or something. Maya's not home anyway. It was a casual suggestion, but Ethan heard the question underneath it. The uncertainty. Adriana had been alone for 5 years and isolation had become her default. Letting people in was still foreign territory. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. They ended up on the couch with a movie neither of them paid much attention to, talking instead about the neighborhood's future and whether the new board would actually be better or just different. Somewhere around 10, Adriana fell asleep against his shoulder, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of deep rest. Ethan should have woken her up, should have said goodnight and gone home. Instead, he sat there in the quiet darkness, thinking about how nothing in his life had gone according to plan. His marriage had failed. His careful isolation had been shattered. He'd gotten dragged into a war with a corrupt HOA president and ended up living with a billionaire in hiding and somehow becoming a community organizer. But sitting here with Adriana asleep against his shoulder and the knowledge that Maya was safe and happy, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Content. Not happy, exactly. Life was too complicated for simple happiness. But content in the way that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even if you never planned to be there. Adriana stirred around 11, blinking awake in confusion. Sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep on you. It's fine. What time is it? Late. I should go. She sat up, running her hands through her hair. Ethan, can I ask you something? Sure. When are you actually moving back to your house? Because you keep saying soon and just a few more days, but it's been almost 2 weeks since the vacate order was rescinded. Ethan felt his face heat. I'm not trying to take advantage. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking because I need to know if this is temporary or if we're actually figuring out something longer term here. I don't know what we're figuring out. Neither do I. But I know I don't want you to leave just because you think you should. If you want to go back to your house because that's better for you and Maya, then go. But if you're leaving because you think you're imposing or because this has gotten too complicated, she trailed off. It has gotten complicated, Ethan said honestly. I know. Maya's already attached to you. She talks about you constantly, asks when we're going back to your house, even though our house is literally 3 doors down. And that's bad? It's risky, because I don't know what this is. I don't know if we're friends or housemates or something else entirely. And I can't let Maya get invested in something that might fall apart. Adriana was quiet for a long moment. I can't promise you anything long term. I'm still figuring out who I am and what I want. But I can promise you that I care about both of you, that having you here has made me feel less hollow, that when I think about you moving out, I feel something that looks a lot like disappointment. That's not nothing. No, it's not. Ethan took a breath. What if we just keep doing what we're doing? No labels, no pressure, just see where it goes? That's very non-committal. I'm a non-committal person. No, you're not. You're scared, which is different. She was right, and they both knew it. Ethan had spent 3 years building walls, and the idea of taking them down, even for someone who made him laugh and challenged him and fit into his life like she'd always been there, was terrifying. I'll make you a deal, Adriana said. Stay through the end of the month. Actually stay, not this half and half out thing where you're sleeping here but keeping all your stuff at your house. Really be here. and then we'll reassess. Why? Because I want to know if this feels as good when we're not in crisis mode, when we're not united against a common enemy, if it's real or just circumstance. Ethan considered that. It was logical, practical, exactly the kind of approach he would have suggested if he were thinking clearly. Okay, he said, through the end of the month. They shook on it, which felt absurdly formal and made them both laugh. Then Ethan went home to his empty house and lay awake thinking about commitments and complications and the terrifying possibility that maybe, possibly, he was ready to stop hiding behind routine and start actually living again. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal after the intensity of the previous month. Richard's criminal case was moving through the system. The HOA audit had uncovered enough financial irregularities to keep lawyers busy for years. The neighborhood was slowly transforming from a place ruled by fear into an actual community. And Ethan settled into Adriana's house like he'd always belonged there. He and Maya moved the rest of their things over. His house became rental property. The interim board actually helped him find a tenant, a young couple new to the neighborhood who were grateful for a place that came without Richard Vance's shadow hanging over it. Maya thrived. She had space to spread out, a chess tutor in Adriana, and the kind of stability that came from seeing her father actually relaxed for once. She'd started calling Adriana by her first name without the formal Ms. prefix, and Adriana had stopped flinching when Maya casually hugged her. Ethan watched them together one evening, Adriana teaching Maya an opening gambit, while Maya narrated her entire thought process out loud, and felt something in his chest expand painfully. This wasn't what he'd planned, wasn't what he'd thought he wanted, but it was starting to feel like what he needed. The last day of the month arrived without fanfare. Ethan realized it only when he was making coffee and saw the calendar date. They'd agreed to reassess, to figure out if this arrangement was temporary or something more. He found Adriana in her home office, video call with someone about a consulting project. She saw him and held up one finger. "Give me a minute." He retreated, made coffee for both of them, and tried to figure out what he actually wanted to say. She emerged 20 minutes later looking tired but satisfied. Client in Singapore. There's 6 versions of confused about their infrastructure architecture. It's actually kind of fun figuring out their mess. You're taking on more consulting work. Yeah, turns out I missed solving problems, just not the corporate politics part. She accepted the coffee gratefully. What's up? You look serious. It's the end of the month. Understanding crossed her face. Right, our reassessment deadline. Yeah. They sat at the kitchen island, coffee between them, neither quite sure how to start this conversation. Finally, Adriana said, "I don't want you to leave. I don't want to leave either. But I need to know what this is, for Maya's sake, if not my own. Is this housemates, friends, something else?" Adriana set down her coffee. Honest answer? I don't know. I haven't dated anyone in almost a decade. Don't even know if I remember how. But I know that when you're here, my house feels like a home instead of a hiding place. And when I think about you leaving, it feels like losing something important. That's more than housemates. Yeah, it is. Ethan took a breath. I'm not ready for anything serious. I know that's not fair to say after living in your house for a month, but I need to be honest. Maya's my priority, and I'm still figuring out who I am as a single parent. I'm not asking for serious. I'm asking for honest. For you to stop treating this like a temporary arrangement when it stopped being temporary weeks ago. What are you proposing? That we acknowledge what this actually is. 2 people who like each other, who work well together, who have built something that neither of us expected. We don't need to define it beyond that. We just need to stop pretending it's not happening. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The idea of letting someone in, of admitting that isolation wasn't actually what he wanted, that maybe, possibly, there was room in his carefully controlled life for something messy and undefined and real. Okay, Ethan said. Let's stop pretending. Adriana smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Yeah? Yeah. They sat there grinning at each other like idiots, until Maya came home from school and demanded to know why everyone looked so weird. That evening, the interim HOA board called an emergency meeting. Not the dramatic kind, just a quick gathering to update the community on the investigation and discuss next steps. Ethan and Adriana went together, walking the 3 blocks to the community center hand in hand for the first time. People noticed. Of course they noticed. Jennifer Henderson made a production of announcing that she'd called it at the block party. Carol Winters gave them both approving nods. Even David Chen, usually focused entirely on business, cracked a smile. The meeting itself was straightforward. The county had formally charged Richard and his brother with multiple counts of fraud. The HOA's civil suit was moving forward. Property values had actually gone up slightly now that the toxic atmosphere was lifting. Marcus Peterson stood up during public comment. I want to propose something. We've spent 6 years being divided and scared. I think it's time we actually became a community. Regular social events, neighborhood improvement projects, support networks for families. Not because the HOA mandates it, but because we actually want to know each other. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. People volunteered to lead different initiatives. Someone suggested a community garden. Another person wanted to organize a kids' sports league that didn't require joining expensive clubs. Watching it unfold, Ethan felt something like pride. This was what they'd fought for. Not just removing Richard, but creating space for people to actually connect instead of just coexist in mutual suspicion. After the meeting, neighbors lingered in small groups, talking and laughing. The atmosphere was completely different from the last emergency meeting. No anger, no fear, just cautious optimism about what came next. Ethan and Adriana were almost to the exit when someone called Adriana's name. They turned to find a reporter from the local paper, press credentials visible. Ms. Mercer-Vale, I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your role in the HOA investigation. No comment, Adriana said automatically. I'm not looking for scandal. I'm writing about community organizing and how residents fought back against corruption. Your story is inspiring. My story is private. Adriana's walls were back up, her expression closed. Ethan touched her arm gently. Maybe one comment? On background? She looked at him, uncertain. He gave her a small nod. Your choice, but maybe this is different. Adriana took a breath. Fine. One comment. Not about my past, about the community. The reporter agreed immediately, pulling out a notebook. What happened here wasn't about one person standing up, Adriana said carefully. It was about a lot of people finally feeling safe enough to speak their truth, about neighbors supporting each other instead of being isolated. I'm glad I could be part of that. But the real story is about community resilience, not individual heroes. The reporter scribbled notes. And your relationship with Mr. Cole? You two seem to have led the opposition. We worked together, Ethan interrupted, along with a lot of other people. Sarah and David Chen, Carol Winters, Marcus Peterson. This was never just the two of us. But you two were targeted specifically, and we responded by building a coalition, Adriana said firmly. That's the story. Not personalities, not drama, just people refusing to accept abuse as normal. They extracted themselves politely and walked home in the cool evening air. Adriana was quiet, processing. You okay? Ethan asked. I just gave my first interview in 5 years, feel like I should be panicking. Are you? Surprisingly, no. It felt okay, controlled. She looked at him. Thank you for suggesting it. You don't have to hide forever. You just have to hide on your own terms. When did you get so wise? I have a 7-year-old. Wisdom is survival. They found Maya at home with the teenage neighbor who sometimes babysat, building an elaborate castle out of blocks. She looked up when they entered, assessed them with one sweeping glance, and announced, You're holding hands different now. Ethan blinked. What? You're holding hands like you mean it instead of like you're just being nice. It's different. Adriana laughed, surprised. You're terrifyingly observant. I know. Maya returned to her castle. Does this mean we're staying here? Ethan and Adriana exchanged glances. Yeah, Ethan said. I think it does. Good. I like it here. And you're happier. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds, indeed. That night, after Maya went to bed, Ethan and Adriana sat on the back deck with wine and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every gap with words. I've been thinking, Adriana said eventually, about what comes next. For me, and I want to start a foundation, something that helps communities fight HOA corruption, legal resources, organizational support, expert consultants, everything we had to piece together, but formalized and accessible. Ethan turned to look at her. That's a big undertaking. I know, but I have the resources, and I have the knowledge now of what it actually takes to fight back. Seems like a waste not to use it. You'd be visible again. On my own terms, though, not as a CEO, as someone who actually gives a damn about people instead of just profit margins. She paused. What do you think? I think it's perfect. I think you'd be amazing at it. You're biased. Absolutely. Doesn't make me wrong. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. Somewhere in the distance, Ethan could hear neighbors talking in their yards, kids playing, the sounds of community instead of isolation. This isn't what I expected, he said finally. Any of it. When I moved to Ridgemont Heights, I was just looking for a place Maya could grow up safely while I figured out how to be a single parent. I wasn't looking for a fight or a relationship or any of this. Life's funny that way. Yeah, it really is. Adriana leaned her head on his shoulder and Ethan felt that same expansion in his chest. Not quite love. It was too soon for that, too fragile, but something adjacent to it, something with potential. Thank you, Adriana said quietly. For what? For seeing me. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the mysterious neighbor. Just me. Thank you for letting me. They stayed like that until the wine was gone and the night air got too cold to ignore, then went inside to the home they were building together, one uncertain day at a time. 3 months after Richard Vance's removal, Ridgemont Heights had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. The community garden Marcus Peterson had proposed was now a half-acre plot where neighbors actually talked to each other while planting tomatoes and arguing about the best fertilizer. The kids' sports league had materialized into something chaotic and enthusiastic, with parents who'd never spoken now coordinating carpools and snack schedules. Even the monthly HOA meetings had changed, shorter, more productive, with actual discussions instead of Richard's monologues. But the real changes were harder to quantify. The atmosphere had shifted. People made eye contact now, waved at neighbors they didn't know well. The fear that had permeated everything for 6 years was dissipating, replaced by something tentative but genuine. Ethan noticed it most when he was with Maya at the park. Parents who'd previously kept to themselves now struck up conversations, asked about his work, about how he was settling in, about whether Maya might want to join the soccer team they were organizing. It was normal suburban interaction, the kind he'd craved 3 years ago when he first moved here, and it felt surreal to have it now. Dad, can I go to Emma's house after school tomorrow? Maya asked one Saturday morning. She was at the kitchen table working through a chess problem Adriana had given her, moving pieces with the kind of concentration most kids reserved for video games. Who's Emma? Emma Henderson. We're partners for the science project. We're building a volcano. Ethan processed that. Emma Henderson, Jennifer Henderson's daughter. The same Jennifer who'd spent years as part of Richard's inner circle, who'd gossiped viciously about anyone who stepped out of line, who'd been openly hostile to both Ethan and Adriana at various points. Sure, he said carefully. I'll text her mom and coordinate. She's actually nice now, Maya said, not looking up from her chessboard. Mrs. Henderson, I mean, she apologized to Adriana last week at the garden thing, said she was sorry for being mean. Ethan hadn't heard about that. He glanced at Adriana, who was making pancakes with the kind of intense focus she brought to everything. She caught his look and shrugged. It was awkward, Adriana said, but genuine, I think. She cried. I told her it was fine, which was mostly true. You didn't mention it, because it wasn't a big deal. People are allowed to change their minds about me. Still, that must have felt good. It felt weird, good weird, but weird. She flipped a pancake with more force than necessary. I'm not used to people apologizing. Usually they just double down or disappear. Maya looked up from her chessboard. Check. What? Adriana came over to look at the position. Wait, how did you... That's a fork. When did you learn forks? Last Tuesday. You were on a call and I was reading the chess book you gave me. It had a whole chapter on tactical patterns. Maya moved her knight with satisfaction. So is that actually check? Adriana studied the board, then laughed. Yeah, that's definitely check. You're getting too good at this. Am I better than Dad yet? Sweetheart, you were better than Dad after 2 lessons, Adriana said, which made Ethan protest ineffectively, while both of them laughed at him. It was moments like these that caught Ethan off guard, the casual domesticity of it, The way Adriana and Maya had developed their own relationship independent of him. The way his daughter had started including Adriana in her mental model of family without any formal discussion or acknowledgement. They ate breakfast together, the three of them around Adriana's kitchen table like they'd been doing it for years instead of months. Maya talked about school and her friends and the elaborate revenge plot she was planning against a classmate who'd stolen her favorite pencil. Adriana listened with the same attention she'd probably given billion-dollar business deals, asking clarifying questions and suggesting strategic alternatives. "You can't put glue in her backpack," Adriana said seriously. "That's escalation beyond the original offense. You need proportional response." "What's that mean?" "It means the punishment should fit the crime. She took your pencil. You make sure she knows you know, and you make it clear that future theft will have consequences, but you don't destroy her stuff." Maya considered this. "Can I tell everyone she picks her nose?" "Does she actually pick her nose?" "Yeah, in math class. It's gross." "Then that's fair game. Public information is always usable." Adriana caught Ethan's expression and added quickly, "For grade school social dynamics only. Different rules apply to adults." "You're teaching my daughter psychological warfare." "I'm teaching her strategic thinking. There's a difference." After breakfast, Maya went to her room to work on homework, and Ethan helped Adriana clean up the kitchen. They developed a rhythm over the past months, working in tandem without getting in each other's way. Comfortable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. "I have a meeting on Tuesday," Adriana said, loading the dishwasher. "In the city, with lawyers about the foundation. The HOA advocacy thing. Yeah, they've drawn up incorporation papers and initial bylaws. I need to review everything and sign off on the structure." She paused. "It's happening. Actually happening." "You sound surprised." "I am. A little. I've spent 5 years avoiding anything that looked like ambition or public engagement, and now I'm about to launch a nonprofit that's specifically designed to put me in the public eye. It's weird." Ethan understood that particular flavor of weird. He'd spent 3 years building walls and avoiding complications, and now he was living with a woman he'd barely known 4 months ago, navigating something that looked increasingly like a relationship even though neither of them had explicitly labeled it as such. "You could still back out," he said, "if it doesn't feel right." "No, it feels right. Just different." She closed the dishwasher and turned to face him. "I want you to come to the meeting." "Why?" "Because you're good at seeing problems I miss. And because you're part of this. The whole foundation idea came from what we built here. I'm not a lawyer or a nonprofit expert, but you are someone who knows how to organize people and fight corruption from the ground level. That perspective matters." She hesitated. "Also, I'd like the moral support. These meetings make me anxious." That admission cost her something. Adriana didn't do vulnerability easily. The fact that she was asking for support instead of just powering through alone was significant. "Okay," Ethan said, "I'll come." The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon, which meant coordinating Maya's schedule and taking half a day off work. Ethan's boss was understanding. The firm he worked for had been following the Ridgemont Heights HOA case with professional interest, and several partners had mentioned they'd be interested in consulting on similar situations. They drove into the city together, Adriana behind the wheel of her practical sedan that was somehow worth more than Ethan's annual salary despite looking completely ordinary. The law offices were in a downtown high-rise, all glass and steel, and the kind of corporate aesthetic that made Ethan feel underdressed, despite wearing his best suit. The lawyers were exactly what he expected: sharp, efficient, speaking in the particular jargon of people who'd spent years thinking about nonprofit law. They walked Adriana through the incorporation documents, the board structure, the initial funding model. Adriana asked pointed questions that suggested she'd done significant research, pushing back on clauses that felt too restrictive or governance structures that concentrated too much power. Ethan mostly listened, occasionally asking questions about implementation or how the foundation would interface with actual communities facing HOA abuse. The lawyers had clearly expected him to be decoration, Adriana's boyfriend there for moral support, and seemed surprised when his questions exposed gaps in their operational planning. "The legal framework is solid," Ethan said during a break, "but the delivery mechanism needs work. Communities fighting HOA corruption don't need another nonprofit telling them what to do. They need resources and support to fight their own battles. We're planning a grant structure, One of the lawyers began. Grants are fine for funding, but what about expertise? What about connecting people with engineers who can disprove false violation claims? Or accountants who can audit suspicious financials? Or community organizers who know how to build coalitions? Ethan pulled out his phone, showing them the network he'd built over the past months. These are people who helped us. Most of them would be willing to help others if there was a structure supporting it. The lawyers looked at Adriana. She smiled. Told you he'd see what you missed. They revised the operational plan on the spot, incorporating Ethan's suggestions about building a network of volunteer experts and creating resources that communities could adapt to their specific situations. By the time the meeting ended 4 hours later, the foundation had evolved from a standard nonprofit into something more innovative and potentially more effective. That was good, Adriana said in the car afterward. She looked energized in a way Ethan rarely saw, her usual careful control replaced by genuine enthusiasm. Really good. Did you see their faces when you suggested the expert network? They hadn't even considered it. Because they're lawyers. They think in terms of legal structures, not practical implementation. This is why I needed you there. She reached over and took his hand. Thank you. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city giving way to suburbs and finally to Ridgemont Heights. Ethan found himself thinking about how much his life had changed in 4 months. How he'd gone from isolated single father to community organizer to nonprofit consultant. How Adriana had gone from reclusive billionaire to his partner in both the literal and figurative sense. Are we dating? He asked suddenly. Adriana nearly swerved into the next lane. What? I'm serious. Are we dating? Because we live together and raise Maya together and apparently build nonprofits together, but we've never actually defined what this is. You want to define it? I want to know what to tell people when they ask, which they do, increasingly often. Adriana was quiet for a moment, navigating traffic. Finally, she said, What do you want to tell them? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Ethan, you're a structural engineer. You're supposed to be good at defining things. I'm good at defining buildings. People are more complicated. She laughed, which broke some of the tension. They pulled into Ridgemont Heights, past the community garden where several neighbors were working, past the park where kids were playing soccer, past all the small signs that this place had become something different than it was. Adriana parked in her driveway. Their driveway, really, since Ethan's car lived here now, too. She turned off the engine but didn't get out. I think we're dating, she said finally, or something like it. I'm not great at relationships, and you're still figuring out life post-divorce, so we're probably doing it wrong by conventional standards. But I like what we have. I like you. I like us. Whatever label fits that is fine with me. It was such a perfectly Adriana answer, honest and practical and slightly awkward, that Ethan couldn't help smiling. Okay, he said. We're dating, or something like it. Good. Now, can we go inside? I promised Maya we'd help with her volcano, and I'm genuinely curious if we can make it explode bigger than the instructions suggest. They found Maya in the backyard with Emma Henderson, both of them covered in papier-mâché paste and surrounded by craft supplies. Jennifer Henderson was there too, sitting on the deck with a cup of coffee, looking uncomfortable but determined. Hi, Jennifer said when she saw them. Emma insisted on working here because apparently your backyard is better for science. I told her we should ask first, but she said Maya already cleared it with you. She did, Adriana said. This morning. It's fine. I brought cookies. Jennifer held up a container like a peace offering. Store-bought? Because let's be honest about my baking skills, but they're good. It was painfully awkward. Jennifer clearly didn't know how to navigate this new dynamic where she wasn't part of Richard's inner circle and wasn't sure if she was forgiven or just being tolerated. Adriana handled it with characteristic directness. Want to help us make the volcano explode? Adriana asked. Jennifer blinked. What? The girls are building a volcano. We're going to add vinegar and baking soda to make it erupt. You can help if you want. I don't know anything about volcanoes. Neither do I. That's what makes it fun. They spent the next hour creating what was probably the most over-engineered second-grade science project in history. Ethan calculated the optimal ratios for maximum eruption. Adriana researched additives that would create better lava flow. Jennifer provided running commentary and kept the girls from drinking the vinegar on a dare. The eruption, when it finally happened, was spectacular. Foam and liquid everywhere, The girls shrieking with delight, the adults laughing at the mess they'd created. Several neighbors came over to see what the commotion was about, and ended up staying, offering suggestions for the second attempt, someone running home to get food coloring to make the lava more realistic. By the time Jennifer and Emma left, the backyard looked like a disaster zone, and Maya was practically vibrating with excitement about presenting her project at school. "That was fun," Jennifer said at the door. She looked at Adriana directly. "Thank you for being kind. You didn't have to be." "Everyone deserves second chances," Adriana said, "even people who were part of the problem." After they left, Ethan and Adriana surveyed the destruction. "We should probably clean this up," Ethan said, "or we could leave it and claim it's an art installation. Pretty sure the HOA has rules about backyard art installations." "We are the HOA now. We can change the rules." Maya appeared between them, still covered in papier-mâché paste. "Can we do this every week?" "Absolutely not," Ethan said. "Maybe," Adriana said at the same time. Maya grinned. I'm going to assume Adriana's answer counts more. That night, after Maya was asleep and the backyard was moderately less disastrous, Ethan found himself in Adriana's home office while she worked on foundation documents. He'd brought his laptop to catch up on work emails, but found himself watching her instead. She was completely focused, the way she got when working on complex problems. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, reading glasses perched on her nose, and she was muttering to herself about organizational structures and tax implications. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I'm observing." "That's creepy semantics." She glanced at him over her glasses. "What?" "I'm trying to figure out when this became my life." "This?" "You, Maya. This house. The foundation. The neighborhood garden. All of it. 4 months ago, I was actively avoiding connection, and now I'm neck deep in it." Adriana saved her document and turned to face him properly. "Having regrets?" "No, that's what's weird. I should be panicking about how fast this is moving, about how much I'm depending on someone I barely know, about what happens if it all falls apart." He paused. "But I'm not. Panicking, I mean. Maybe because it's not falling apart. Yet. You're very committed to disaster planning." "I'm a structural engineer. Disaster planning is literally my job." Adriana stood up, crossed the small office, and sat on the edge of her desk in front of him. "Can I tell you something?" "Sure." "I'm terrified. Constantly. Of screwing this up." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "I've never done this. Never lived with someone I was dating. Never helped raise a kid. Never built a life that was about more than work and achievement. I don't know what I'm doing, and I keep waiting for you to realize that and decide this was a mistake." "That's not going to happen." "You can't know that." "No. But I can know that we're both trying, that we communicate when things are hard, that we're building something together instead of just coexisting." He reached for her hand. "That's more than I had in my marriage. More than I thought I'd have again." "That's a depressingly low bar." "Maybe. But we're clearing it. That counts for something." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, both of them probably overthinking everything, but at least doing it together. "The foundation launches officially next month," Adriana said eventually. "There's going to be press, attention, people digging into my past and asking questions about why a former tech CEO is suddenly championing HOA reform. You ready for that?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She squeezed his hand. "Will you be there at the launch event?" "Do you want me there?" "I want you everywhere," which is terrifying to admit, but there it is. Ethan pulled her closer, and she came willingly, settling against him in a way that had become familiar over the past months. "I'll be there." The foundation launch was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at a community center in downtown. Adriana had wanted something low-key, but her lawyers had convinced her that generating attention was part of the strategy. The more people knew about the foundation, the more communities could access its resources. The week before the launch, Richard Vance's criminal trial began. It was all over the local news. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of authority. His brother Robert had already pleaded guilty to reduce charges in exchange for testimony against Richard. The county prosecutor was pushing for serious prison time. Ethan deliberately didn't follow the coverage too closely. Richard had consumed enough of his mental energy. But it was impossible to avoid entirely. Neighbors brought it up constantly. The trial had become a symbol of accountability that Ridgemont Heights desperately needed to witness. "Do you think he'll actually go to prison?" Maya asked one evening. They were making dinner together, the three of them moving around Adriana's kitchen in the choreographed chaos that had become their routine. "Probably," Ethan said. "The evidence is pretty clear." "Good. He was mean." "He was," Adriana agreed. "But the point isn't revenge. It's making sure he can't do the same thing to other people." "Isn't that the same thing?" "No. Revenge is about punishment. Justice is about prevention and accountability. They feel similar, but they're different." Adriana tasted the sauce she was making, added more salt. "Revenge would be me using my money and lawyers to destroy every aspect of his life. Justice is the legal system holding him accountable for what he actually did." Maya thought about that. "Did you want revenge?" "At first, yeah. When he was threatening your dad and making all our lives miserable, I wanted to crush him. But your dad kept me from going down that road." "How?" "By insisting we do things the right way, build community support, gather evidence, let the system work." She looked at Ethan. "It was annoying at the time, but he was right." "I'm going to remember you said that," Ethan said. "Don't push your luck." They ate dinner together, Maya monopolizing the conversation with a detailed analysis of her classmates' social dynamics that was honestly more insightful than it had any right to be. After Maya went to bed, Ethan and Adriana sat on the couch with wine and the comfortable exhaustion of people who'd survived another day of functional domesticity. "I'm nervous about Tuesday," Adriana admitted. "The launch? Yeah, what if nobody shows up? Or worse, what if the wrong people show up and turn it into a circus?" "It'll be fine. You've got a good team. The message is solid. And you've got about 40 people from Ridgemont Heights who've already said they're coming to support you. That's because they feel obligated. That's because they actually care about you now. Which is different than 4 months ago when they just thought you were weird and antisocial." "I am weird and antisocial." "Yeah, but now you're weird and antisocial in a way that helped them reclaim their community. That earns loyalty." Adriana leaned her head on his shoulder. "What if I'm not good at this? Public speaking and advocacy and being the face of something." "Then you'll learn. Same way you learned everything else." "I was never bad at business. I might be bad at this." "You won't be. But even if you are, we'll figure it out together." The launch event exceeded everyone's expectations. Over 200 people showed up, HOA board members from other communities dealing with similar corruption, journalists covering local governance, activists interested in housing rights, and a significant contingent from Ridgemont Heights, wearing homemade t-shirts that said, "Community over control." Adriana's speech was perfect. She talked about how she'd walked away from corporate success only to discover that power dynamics existed everywhere, even in suburban neighborhoods. How Richard Vance's abuse had forced her to choose between hiding or fighting. How the community's collective action had shown her what real power looked like, not the kind wielded by one person over others, but the kind built through mutual support and shared resistance. She announced the Foundation's mission to provide legal resources, expert consultation, and organizational support to communities fighting HOA corruption, to create frameworks that protected individual rights while maintaining genuine community standards, to prove that accountability was possible even in systems designed to concentrate power. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 different communities requested consultations that night. A lawyer specializing in housing rights offered to join the Foundation's board pro bono. 2 engineering firms committed to providing volunteer technical assessments. A former HOA president who'd been forced out after questioning financial irregularities offered to help develop organizing strategies. Ethan watched from the side of the room as Adriana handled question after question, sometimes confident and sometimes clearly uncomfortable, but always authentic. This was what she'd needed, he realized, not to hide from who she'd been, but to channel those skills toward something that actually mattered to her. After the formal presentation ended, the event shifted into networking and conversation. Ethan found himself talking to a city council member interested in HOA reform legislation, explaining the technical details of how Richard had manufactured violations and how better oversight could prevent similar abuse. He was mid-conversation when someone tapped his shoulder. He turned to find Carol Winters, dressed more formally than he'd ever seen her, looking nervous but determined. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked. They found a quiet corner. Carol clutched her purse like a lifeline. I wanted to tell you something, she said. Richard's trial. I'm testifying tomorrow. I heard. Are you okay? Terrified. His lawyer is going to try to discredit me, make it seem like I'm just a scorned board member with an axe to grind. She took a breath. But I'm doing it anyway. Because what you and Adriana did, standing up when it was hard, building something better instead of just tearing him down, that mattered. And I want to be part of making sure he can't do this to anyone else. You're already part of it. Those recordings you provided were crucial. I know, but I need to do more. I need to actually stand up in court and tell the truth about what he did, about what I enabled by staying silent. She looked at him directly. I wanted to thank you for giving me the courage to do that. You always had the courage. You just needed to know you weren't alone. Carol left shortly after, looking marginally less terrified. Ethan made his way back to Adriana, who was still surrounded by people, but caught his eye and mouthed, "Help me," with exaggerated desperation. He extracted her with practiced efficiency, claiming she had another commitment they couldn't miss. In the car, Adriana slumped in her seat. That was exhausting. That was amazing. You were amazing. I said about 40 times. And I definitely mixed up 2 different questions from that reporter. Nobody cared. They cared about the message, about what you're building. She turned to look at him. We're building. This isn't just me anymore. I'm technical support. You're the visionary. You're a lot more than technical support, and you know it. She reached for his hand. I couldn't do this without you. Any of it. They drove home to Ridgemont Heights, to the house that had become theirs through a combination of crisis and choice, to Maya, who was having a sleepover at Emma Henderson's, and had left them a note about making sure they remembered to feed her fish. Want to actually celebrate? Ethan asked when they got inside. We could open the expensive wine you've been saving. We could, Adriana said. Or we could just sit on the couch and decompress like normal people. That works too. They ended up doing both. Expensive wine consumed while sprawled on the couch, talking about the evening and processing the sudden reality that Adriana's foundation was actually happening, that the idea born from their fight against Richard had evolved into something with real potential to help people. I got an email today, Adriana said eventually, from my former VP of operations at Meridian. She heard about the foundation and wants to meet. That's good, right? I don't know. We didn't part on great terms. I walked away from the company and she felt abandoned, took it personally. Maybe she's gotten over it. Maybe. Or maybe she wants to tell me what a selfish disaster I am for leaving. Adriana took a long drink of wine. I don't know how to navigate the parts of my old life that are bleeding into my new life. You do what you always do. You be honest. If she's angry, you acknowledge it. If she wants to rebuild a connection, you decide if that's something you want. But you don't have to hide who you were or apologize for choosing differently. When did you get so good at this? I'm not good at it. I'm just used to navigating complicated relationships with people who have expectations I can't meet. Comes with the divorce territory. Your ex-wife. Yeah, she still calls sometimes. Wants to know how Maya's doing. Wants to feel involved without actually being involved. He set down his wine glass. I used to get angry about it. Now I just answer her questions and move on. She made her choices. I made mine. We both have to live with that. Do you ever regret it? The divorce? Not for a second. We were making each other miserable. Maya's better off with one happy parent than 2 people who resented each other. He paused. Do you regret leaving Meridian? Every time I see my former net worth, which is petty and shouldn't matter, but sometimes it does. She smiled wryly. Turns out you can walk away from billions and still occasionally wish you had billions. You still have more money than I'll see in a lifetime. I know. Which makes feeling any kind of regret completely ridiculous. But feelings are ridiculous sometimes. They fell into comfortable silence, the wine slowly disappearing, the house quiet around them. Ethan thought about the strange path that had led them here, how a single decision to speak up at a block party had cascaded into dismantling corruption, building a community, launching a foundation, and creating something that looked increasingly like a life he actually wanted. I love you, Adriana said suddenly. Ethan's brain stuttered. They'd been carefully not saying those words, both of them aware of the weight they carried, and unsure if they were ready for that particular commitment. You don't have to say it back, Adriana continued quickly. I just needed to say it, because it's true, and I'm tired of not saying true things. I love you too, Ethan said. I have for a while. I was just waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment? Sitting on your couch, drinking expensive wine while discussing our respective baggage? Yeah, this feels exactly right for us. Adriana laughed, and it was the most genuine sound he'd heard from her all night. We're terrible at romance. We're perfect at our version of romance. Our version involves HOA corruption and nonprofit launches. And volcano science projects. Don't forget those. How could I forget? We're still finding papier-mâché paste in weird places. They kissed then, soft and unhurried. The kind of kiss that wasn't about passion, but about recognition. About two people who'd found each other in unexpected circumstances and decided to build something despite having every reason to protect themselves instead. When they finally went to bed, their bed, in the bedroom that had gradually accumulated both their belongings, Ethan lay awake thinking about how much had changed and how much was still uncertain. The foundation was launching but could fail. Richard's trial could go wrong. The community could backslide into old patterns. His relationship with Adriana could hit obstacles they hadn't anticipated. But for the first time in years, uncertainty didn't feel like something to avoid. It felt like possibility. The next morning brought news that Richard Vance had been convicted on 7 counts of fraud and embezzlement. The prosecution was recommending a 5-year sentence. His brother Robert had already been sentenced to 18 months. Ridgemont Heights collectively exhaled. People came out of their houses to talk to neighbors, to process what the verdict meant, to finally believe that the chapter of fear was actually over. Marcus Peterson organized an impromptu gathering at the community garden that evening. Not a celebration, that felt too vindictive, but an acknowledgement. A moment to recognize what they'd survived and what they'd built in the aftermath. Ethan and Adriana went with Maya, who immediately ran off to play with the other kids while the adults congregated around picnic tables laden with potluck contributions. I can't believe it's actually over, Sarah Chen said. She and David had brought enough food to feed everyone twice over. Part of me kept expecting Richard to have some trick up his sleeve, some way to weasel out of accountability. He tried, David said. His lawyer filed about 50 different motions, but the evidence was too solid. Because you all documented everything, Carol Winters added. She'd been at the trial every day, and testifying had clearly taken a toll. Every violation, every payment, every abusive conversation, that's what made the difference. We learned from Richard, Adriana said quietly. He was meticulous about documentation. We just used that same approach against him. Jennifer Henderson appeared with a bottle of wine and a slightly manic energy. Are we allowed to celebrate? Because I know we're being dignified and community-minded, but I really want to celebrate. We can celebrate, Marcus said. We took down a corrupt official through legal means and built something better in the process. That's worth celebrating. So they did. Not with vindictive joy, but with genuine relief. People shared stories about Richard's various abuses that they'd been too scared to mention before, laughed about the absurd violations and manufactured crises, acknowledged how hard it had been to live under that particular kind of petty tyranny. As the evening wore on and kids played in the gathering dusk, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the garden with Adriana, watching the community they'd helped rebuild. We did good, Adriana said. We did. What happens now? Now we keep going. The foundation helps other communities. Ridgemont Heights continues healing. We figure out what our actual lives look like when they're not defined by crisis. That sounds terrifying. That sounds normal, which is what we both claim to want. Adriana leaned against him. I'm not sure I know how to do normal. Neither am I, but we can figure it out together. Maya ran over then, grass-stained and happy, demanding they come see the fireflies that had appeared near the community garden's pond. They followed her, joining the cluster of kids and parents marveling at the small lights dancing in the darkness. It was a perfect moment, simple and genuine and unmarred by drama or conflict. Just people being together because they wanted to be, in a space they'd created through collective effort. Ethan caught Adriana's eye across the small crowd. She smiled at him, and he saw in that smile all the things they'd survived and all the possibilities still ahead. It wasn't perfect. They weren't perfect. But they were here, together, building something real. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, that felt like enough. 6 months after Richard's conviction, Ethan woke up to the sound of Maya and Adriana arguing about breakfast in the kitchen. Not real arguing, the playful kind that had become their morning routine. Maya insisting that cereal counted as a balanced meal if you added fruit. Adriana maintaining that actual cooking was occasionally required. Both of them probably performing for his benefit since they knew he was awake. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to their voices, still marveling at how completely his life had been reconstructed. The bedroom he was in had been Adriana's alone a year ago. Now it held both their clothes, his engineering textbooks mixed with her business books on the shelves, a framed photo of the three of them at the community garden on the nightstand. When he finally got up and went to the kitchen, he found Maya standing on a stool trying to reach the cereal on the top shelf while Adriana blocked her with a spatula. "I'm making eggs," Adriana said firmly. "I don't want eggs." "You wanted eggs yesterday." "That was yesterday. Today I want cereal." "The cereal is full of sugar and food coloring." "The eggs are full of chicken embryos. That's way grosser." Ethan intervened before this escalated further. "How about eggs and cereal? Revolutionary concept called compromise." Both of them turned to glare at him, united in their opposition to his reasonable solution. It was moments like these that made him realize how much they'd become a unit, sometimes allies, sometimes opponents, but always engaged with each other in a way that felt real and lived in rather than performed. "Fine," Maya said, "but I get to pick what's on TV." "We don't watch TV at breakfast," Adriana said. "We did last Saturday." "That was a special occasion. Your science project won the school competition." "So we only watch TV when I accomplish things? That's going to give me weird achievement issues when I'm older." Ethan caught Adriana's eye, both of them trying not to laugh. Maya had been spending too much time with Adriana's former VP of operations, who'd become a regular visitor and had absolutely no filter about discussing childhood psychological development. They ate breakfast together, eggs and cereal because compromise, while Maya detailed her upcoming day with the kind of intensity most people reserved for military operations. She had soccer practice, then a play date with Emma Henderson, then chess club where she was apparently staging a campaign to change the tournament structure because the current system favored defensive players. "You're spending too much time with Adriana," Ethan said. "What's that supposed to mean?" both Maya and Adriana asked simultaneously. "It means you're both getting too good at organizing coups." "That's not a bad skill," Adriana said. "The world needs more people who know how to organize effective coups. Please don't teach my 8-year-old to overthrow governments. I'm teaching her to question authority and fight systemic problems. If that occasionally looks like overthrowing governments, so be it." Maya beamed. "When I grow up, I want to be like Adriana." "You should aim higher," Adriana said, but she was smiling in that way that meant she was genuinely touched. After breakfast, Ethan drove Maya to school while Adriana prepared for a board meeting at the foundation. The organization had grown faster than anyone expected. 6 months in, they'd assisted 43 communities dealing with HOA corruption, helped draft model legislation in 3 states, and built a network of over 200 volunteer experts. The foundation had been featured in national news, and Adriana had become something of an unlikely spokesperson for housing rights activism. "How's Adriana doing with all the attention?" Maya asked as they drove. She'd developed a habit of asking these kinds of questions, checking in on the adults in her life with an emotional intelligence that sometimes unnerved Ethan. "She's handling it. It's hard for her, but she's getting better. She gets nervous before big speeches. I can tell because she reorganizes her office." "Yeah, I've noticed that too. But then she does the speeches anyway. That's brave, right? Being scared but doing it anyway?" "That's exactly what brave is." Maya was quiet for a moment, watching the familiar streets of Ridgemont Heights pass by. The neighborhood looked different now, more lived in, less sterile. Kids played in yards without constant parental supervision. People actually used their front porches. Small signs of community that had been absent under Richard's regime. "Dad," Maya said as they pulled up to the school, "are you going to marry Adriana?" Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Where did that come from?" "Emma asked me if you were married. I said no, but you lived together. She said that meant you were probably going to get married." "Are you?" It was a fair question. He and Adriana had been together for almost a year now, living together for most of it. They'd built a life that looked increasingly permanent, but neither of them had brought up marriage, both carefully avoiding that particular conversation. "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. Is that something you want? Maya considered it with her characteristic seriousness. I want things to stay how they are. If getting married means that, then yeah. But if getting married means things get weird and complicated like they did with you and Mom, then no. That's very wise. I know. She grabbed her backpack. But I think Adriana's different than Mom. She doesn't want to be somewhere else. She wants to be here. She got out of the car and ran toward the school before Ethan could respond. He sat there for a moment, processing his 8-year-old daughter's insight and wondering when exactly she'd become so perceptive about adult relationships. When he got back to the house, he found Adriana in her office, surrounded by papers and looking stressed in that particular way that meant the foundation board meeting wasn't going to be pleasant. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She pushed back from her desk. "We're growing too fast. We have more communities requesting help than we can effectively support. The board wants to hire more staff, but I'm worried about losing the personal touch that made us effective in the first place. So hire carefully, people who understand the mission rather than just filling positions." "That's what I keep saying, but the board thinks I'm being a control freak." She paused. "Maybe I am being a control freak." "You're being cautious. There's a difference." "Is there? Because sometimes I can't tell." She stood up, started pacing. "I walked away from Meridian because I'd built something I couldn't control anymore. Something that had grown beyond my ability to maintain its original mission. And now I'm building something else that's growing, and I'm terrified I'm making the same mistakes." Ethan recognized the spiral she was entering, the one where past failures contaminated present decisions. He'd done the same thing after his divorce, seeing every new relationship complication as evidence that he was fundamentally broken. "Come here," he said. She came over, and he pulled her into a hug. She resisted for a second. She still wasn't great at accepting comfort, then relaxed against him. "This isn't Meridian," Ethan said. "You built Meridian alone, focused on growth and profit. You're building this with a team focused on mission and impact. Different foundation, different outcome." "You don't know that." "No, but I know you, and I know you're not the same person who walked away from that company. You've learned things, changed things about how you operate." "Have I? Or am I just better at hiding my worst impulses?" "Adriana, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "You let me move into your house when you'd spent 5 years avoiding connection. You started a foundation specifically to help other people instead of accumulating more power. You've become a fixture in Maya's life and a genuine part of this community. Those aren't the actions of someone who hasn't changed." She was quiet for a long moment. "Maya asked you about marriage, didn't she?" "How did you know?" "Because she asked me the same thing 2 days ago. Wanted to know if we were going to make it official." Adriana pulled back to look at him properly. "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know." "What did you tell her?" "Same thing," which apparently was the wrong answer because she launched into a whole speech about how adults should make decisions instead of just letting things happen to them. She smiled slightly. "I'm pretty sure she was quoting something I said about HOA organizing back at me." "She's terrifying." "She's brilliant, and she has a point." "About us getting married?" "About us making decisions instead of just drifting." Adriana moved back to sit on the edge of her desk. "We've been in crisis mode for so long that I think we forgot to actually discuss what we want long term. We just kept moving forward because forward was the only option." Ethan sat down in her desk chair. This was the conversation he'd been avoiding, partly because he didn't know what he wanted, and partly because he was scared of what Adriana might want. "What do you want?" he asked. "Honestly, I want exactly what we have. I want to wake up with you and have ridiculous breakfast arguments with Maya and work on the foundation and come home to this house that stopped feeling like a hiding place and started feeling like a home." She paused. "But I also know that exactly what we have isn't actually sustainable without some kind of commitment. Not legal necessarily, but emotional. An acknowledgement that this is permanent, not just extended temporary. You want to know I'm not leaving. I want to know we're building something together, not just coexisting, not just making it work day by day. Actually building with intention." Ethan thought about his marriage to Maya's mother, how they drifted into commitment without ever really discussing what they wanted, how that lack of intention had eventually destroyed them when their unspoken expectations diverged. "I want to marry you." he said. The words came out before he'd fully processed them, but they felt right. Not because Maya asked, or because it's the next logical step. Because I want the legal and emotional commitment. I want to know that when things get hard, and they will get hard, we're locked in. That walking away isn't an easy option. Adriana stared at him. Was that a proposal? That was a statement of intent. If you want a proposal, I can plan something better than me sitting in your office chair while you're stressed about a board meeting. No, this is perfect. This is exactly us. She crossed the room, took his hands, pulled him to his feet. Ask me properly. Adriana Vale, will you marry me? Yes, obviously yes. Did you really think I'd say no? I thought there was a non-zero chance you'd panic and run away to start a new life in a different suburb. I'm done running. I'm done hiding. I'm ready to actually build something permanent. She kissed him, and it felt like a seal on something that had been unspoken but understood for months. We should probably tell Maya. She's going to be insufferable about being right. I know, it's going to be great. They picked Maya up from school together that afternoon, both of them trying to act normal and failing completely. Maya picked up on it immediately. What happened? She demanded from the back seat. What makes you think something happened? Ethan asked. Because you're both doing that thing where you think you're being subtle, but you're actually really obvious. Did someone die? No, Adriana said. The opposite of dying, actually. Maya processed that. The opposite of dying is living, which you were already doing, so that doesn't make sense. Unless... She sat up straighter. Are you getting married? How did you possibly get there from that? Ethan asked. Because you're both happy nervous instead of regular nervous. And you keep looking at each other like you have a secret. And when I asked about marriage this morning, Dad said he didn't know, but now he looks like he knows. She paused. So are you? Yes, Adriana said. We're getting married. The shriek Maya let out was probably illegal in several states. She demanded details immediately. When, where, could she be in the wedding? Could she help plan it? Could she invite all her friends? Would there be cake? Would Adriana wear a fancy dress? Would this mean she could officially call Adriana her stepmom? We literally just decided this an hour ago, Ethan said. We haven't planned anything. Then we need to start planning. Emma's parents got married at the botanical gardens, and it was really pretty. Or we could do it at the community garden since that's where everything started. Or, Maya, Adriana interrupted gently. Take a breath. We have time to figure it out. But what if you don't figure it out, and then you just keep waiting and never actually do it? Then you can yell at us. But I promise we're actually doing this. Maya settled back in her seat, looking satisfied. Okay, but I want to help plan. I'm good at planning things. They spent the rest of the drive fielding Maya's increasingly elaborate wedding suggestions. By the time they got home, she'd planned a ceremony that involved doves, a string quartet, custom t-shirts for all the attendees, and a cake shaped like the Ridgemont Heights community garden. We're doing exactly none of that, Ethan said. Some of that, Adriana corrected. The community garden is actually not a terrible idea. That evening, after Maya finally exhausted herself with wedding planning and went to bed, Ethan and Adriana sat on the back deck with wine and the comfortable silence of people who'd made a significant decision and were still processing it. My ex-wife is going to be interesting about this, Ethan said. You haven't told her we're together. She knows we live together. She doesn't know it's serious. She's been operating under the assumption that I'm still too broken from our divorce to actually commit to anyone. Are you? Too broken, I mean? Probably, but I'm committing anyway. He took a sip of wine. What about your people? Anyone who's going to have opinions? My former board is going to be fascinated. Most of them thought I died when I disappeared. A few tried to track me down, but I was very good at being unfindable. She smiled slightly. They're going to have so many opinions about me marrying a structural engineer and living in the suburbs. Judging you for marrying down? Judging me for being happy in a way they didn't think was possible. For building a life that doesn't revolve around money and power. She looked at him. You're not marrying down, by the way. You're marrying someone who's been trying to figure out how to be a functional human for 5 years and only recently started succeeding. I'm marrying someone who saw injustice and fought back. Who built a foundation that's helping people. Who learned how to love my daughter almost as much as I do. He paused. And who makes really good pasta. The pasta is store-bought. I just heat it up nicely. Still counts. They sat in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about the strange path that had led them here. A block party confrontation, a manufactured crisis, a community rising up against corruption, two people finding each other in the chaos and deciding to build something permanent. I'm scared, Adriana admitted quietly. Of what? Of screwing this up, of falling back into old patterns, of being the kind of person who's good at building empires but terrible at maintaining relationships. You're not that person anymore. How do you know? Because that person wouldn't be scared. She'd be confident she could make anything work through sheer force of will. You're scared because you actually care about the outcome. That's growth. Adriana leaned her head on his shoulder. You're very wise for someone who's terrible at chess. I contain multitudes. The wedding planning predictably became a community affair. Marcus Peterson insisted on officiating. He'd gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. Sarah and David Chen wanted to cater. Jennifer Henderson volunteered to coordinate decorations despite having no apparent qualification beyond enthusiasm. Carol Winters offered to organize the guest list with the same meticulous attention she'd once applied to HOA violation tracking. Maya appointed herself junior wedding planner and took the role seriously enough to create spreadsheets. Ethan had no idea where she'd learned to make spreadsheets, but suspected Adriana was secretly teaching her business skills alongside chess strategy. They decided on the community garden for the ceremony, partly because Maya had been right about the symbolism, and partly because it felt appropriate. The place where Ridgemont Heights had started rebuilding was the place where Ethan and Adriana would formalize their commitment. The foundation's board meeting happened 2 days before the wedding. Adriana had been dreading it, but Ethan convinced her that she couldn't reschedule her own wedding because of work anxiety. That's exactly the kind of thing you're supposed to not do anymore, he pointed out. But the board will survive. You're allowed to have a life outside the foundation. That's literally the whole point of everything you've built. She went to the meeting armed with compromise proposals and research on sustainable growth models. The board was initially resistant, but Adriana had learned over the past year how to advocate without bulldozing. She listened to concerns, incorporated feedback, and by the end of the meeting had negotiated a growth plan that satisfied both her need for quality control and the board's desire for expansion. How'd it go? Ethan asked when she got home. Good. Really good, actually. We're hiring 3 new staff members, but they'll be people I interview and approve. And we're creating a mentorship structure so the original team trains new people on our methods. She looked surprised at herself. I compromised successfully. Character growth. Very impressive. Don't mock me. This is hard. I'm not mocking. I'm genuinely proud. He pulled her close. You're getting better at letting people in, trusting others with things you care about. I hate that you're right about this. You'll get used to it. We have a lifetime for you to get used to it. The wedding day arrived with characteristic Maya chaos. She woke them up at 6 in the morning, insisting they needed to start getting ready immediately, even though the ceremony wasn't until 4 in the afternoon. What if something goes wrong? Maya demanded. What if someone forgets something? What if the flowers die? What if it rains? Then we'll handle it, Adriana said with impressive calm for someone who'd been woken up before sunrise. Weddings are about commitment, not perfect execution. But I want it to be perfect. Why? Maya struggled to articulate it. Finally, she said, because you guys deserve perfect. Because you fought so hard for everything and I want today to be good. Adriana knelt down to Maya's eye level. Listen to me. The only thing that matters today is that your dad and I are making a commitment to each other and to you. Everything else is just decoration. If the flowers die or it rains or something goes wrong, we'll still be a family at the end of the day. That's the only perfect that matters. Maya nodded, looking marginally less stressed. Okay, but I still think we should start getting ready now. They compromised on starting at 8, which gave them a leisurely morning of preparation without the panic Maya had envisioned. Adriana's former VP of operations arrived to help with final details, bringing breakfast pastries and the kind of organizational efficiency that made Maya look like an amateur. I'm so glad you found this, she told Adriana, while adjusting the flowers in the bridal bouquet. When you left Meridian, I thought you'd lost your mind, walked away from everything we built, but you were just building something different. I didn't know what I was building, Adriana admitted. I just knew I needed to stop building the wrong things. And now? Now I'm building a life with people who matter, on terms that feel right. She glanced at Ethan across the room, who was attempting to tie a tie while Maya provided unhelpful commentary. It's messier than running a corporation, but it's real. The ceremony itself was simple and perfect in the way that mattered. The community garden was filled with neighbors who'd become friends. Marcus officiated with surprising eloquence. Sarah and David's catering was spectacular. Jennifer's decorations were enthusiastic, if somewhat over the top. When it came time for vows, Adriana went first. She'd written something traditional, then scrapped it that morning and decided to speak from the heart. Ethan, a year ago I was hiding from the world, building walls, avoiding connection. You stood up for me when you had no reason to, and that single act of courage changed everything. Her voice wavered slightly. You showed me that being strong doesn't mean being alone, that building something real requires vulnerability, that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other. She looked at Maya, who was standing next to Ethan with the rings. And Maya, I promise to be the best stepmother I can be. To teach you chess and inappropriate levels of strategic thinking. To support your dad in raising you. To be here, always, as part of this family we've built together. Ethan's vows were simpler, but no less meaningful. Adriana, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Not because you built a company or have more money than I can comprehend, but because you had the courage to walk away when something wasn't right. To rebuild your life from scratch. To let me and Maya into that life, even when you were scared. He took her hands. I promise to be your partner in building whatever comes next. To support your work with the foundation. To call you out when you're being a control freak. To remind you that you're allowed to be imperfect and human. And to love you exactly as you are, not as some idealized version you think you should be. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden by the time they exchanged rings. The kiss was met with cheers and applause, and Maya yelling, "Finally," loud enough to make everyone laugh. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted, casual, community-focused, filled with good food and better conversation. People danced badly to music from someone's phone. Kids ran around the garden unsupervised and completely happy. Neighbors who'd been strangers a year ago laughed together like old friends. Late in the evening, when things were winding down, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the garden with Marcus Peterson. They watched Adriana teaching a group of kids how to dance, Maya right in the middle of it, all of them laughing at their collective lack of rhythm. "You did good," Marcus said. "Both of you. What you built here. We didn't build it alone. No, but you started it. Gave people permission to stand up, showed them it was possible." He paused. "I've been thinking about running for city council. There are HOA reform laws that need passing, oversight mechanisms that need implementing. Figured someone should make sure what happened here doesn't happen elsewhere." "You'd be good at that." "Maybe. Figured I owed it to try, because of what you and Adriana showed me, that fighting back is possible. That change doesn't require superhuman courage, just regular people willing to stand up together." Ethan thought about that. About how a single decision at a block party had cascaded into a community transformation, a non-profit foundation, and now potentially municipal reform. About how courage was contagious in the best possible way. "Let me know if you need anything," Ethan said. "Campaign support, technical expertise, whatever. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being proof that good things can come from fighting the right battles." Later, when the last guests had left and the garden was quiet, Ethan and Adriana walked home through the streets of Ridgemont Heights, with Maya between them, holding both their hands. "That was a good wedding," Maya announced. "Not perfect because the cake was kind of dry, but good." "High praise from our most demanding critic," Adriana said. "I'm not demanding, I'm thorough. There's a difference." "Where have I heard that before?" Ethan asked. They reached their house, officially their house now, in every legal and emotional sense. The porch light was on, welcoming them home. Inside, their lives were intertwined in ways that would take effort to separate. Books on shelves, photos on walls, the accumulated evidence of shared existence. Maya went straight to bed, exhausted from the excitement. Ethan and Adriana stood in the doorway of her room, watching her fall asleep. "We did it," Adriana whispered. "We did. I mean, all of it. Survived Richard, built the foundation, created this family, actually committed to something permanent. Having regrets already? No. Just marveling at how none of this was planned, how a year ago I was alone in this house actively avoiding human connection, and now… She gestured at the sleeping child, at Ethan beside her, at the life they'd constructed. Now I have this. They retreated to their own bedroom, changed out of wedding clothes, and lay in bed talking about the day, about funny moments and touching speeches, and the way Maya had cried during the vows, despite claiming she had something in her eye. "What do you think happens next?" Adriana asked, "after we finish basking in our successful wedding and return to normal life?" "We keep building. The foundation grows. Maya gets older and more terrifying. We navigate whatever challenges come up." Ethan pulled her closer. "We do what we've been doing, just with legal paperwork now." "That's very romantic." "I'm a structural engineer. Romance isn't my strong suit." "You're better at it than you think." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you." "For what?" "For standing up at that block party. For not walking away when things got complicated. For seeing me as a person instead of a billionaire or a project or a problem to solve." She turned to face him. "For giving me permission to build a life that actually feels like mine." "You gave yourself permission. I just stood next to you while you did it. That's all I needed. Someone to stand next to me." They fell asleep like that, tangled together in the comfortable way of people who'd learned each other's bodies and habits. Outside, Ridgemont Heights slept peacefully. The community garden rested under moonlight, evidence of collective effort and shared victory. The Foundation's work continued in communities across the country, helping people fight back against their own versions of Richard Vance. But in that bedroom, in that moment, the world narrowed to just two people who'd found each other in chaos and chosen to build something permanent. Who'd learned that courage wasn't about being unafraid, but about being afraid and doing it anyway. That family wasn't about perfection, but about showing up consistently. That love wasn't a feeling that happened to you, but a decision you made every day. 3 years later, Ethan stood in the same community garden at another event. The Foundation was hosting a conference on HOA reform, bringing together activists and lawyers and affected homeowners from across the country. Marcus Peterson was there as a newly elected city councilman, having successfully passed 3 pieces of reform legislation. Carol Winters ran a support group for people recovering from HOA abuse. Sarah Chen had become the Foundation's volunteer CFO. Adriana was on stage, speaking to a crowd of over 300 people about the importance of community organizing and sustained resistance to corrupt authority. She was confident now in a way she hadn't been at the Foundation launch. Still got nervous, still reorganized her office before big speeches, but had learned to channel that anxiety into effective advocacy. Maya, now 11 and somehow even more terrifying than at 8, sat next to Ethan in the front row, live tweeting the conference with commentary that was way too sophisticated for her age. "She's really good at this," Maya said, nodding at Adriana on stage. "Yeah, she is." "You're both really good at this, the whole fighting corruption and building community thing." She looked at him. "I want to do this when I grow up. Help people fight back against bullies with power. That's a good goal." "I know. I've been thinking about it a lot." She returned her attention to her phone, typing rapidly. "Also, Emma and I are starting a student advocacy group at school. The dress code is super sexist and we're organizing a protest." "Does your principal know about this?" "Not yet. We're building coalition support first, just like you and Adriana taught me." Ethan watched his daughter plan her middle school revolution and felt something like awe. This was what they'd built, not just a foundation or a marriage or a community, but a legacy. Proof that standing up mattered, that regular people could fight back against corruption and win, that courage was teachable and contagious. After the conference, they walked home together through Ridgemont Heights. The neighborhood had continued evolving. More families had moved in, attracted by the genuine community rather than just the property values. The HOA was functional but not oppressive, focused on actual community needs rather than arbitrary power. Richard Vance had served 3 years and been released on parole. He'd moved to a different state, and nobody in Ridgemont Heights spent much time thinking about him anymore. He'd been reduced from tyrant to cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when power went unchecked. That evening, the 3 of them had dinner together like always. Maya narrated her protest plans with the kind of strategic thinking that suggested she'd been paying attention to everything Ethan and Adriana had done. They offered suggestions, playing devil's advocate, helping her refine her approach. After Maya went to bed, Ethan and Adriana sat on their back deck with wine and the comfortable silence of people who'd built something that lasted. "She's going to change the world," Adriana said. "She learned from the best." "We didn't change the world. We just changed one neighborhood and started a foundation. We showed people that fighting back was possible, that corruption doesn't have to be tolerated, that community matters more than hierarchy." Ethan took her hand. "That's not nothing." "No, it's not nothing." They sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about the past 3 years and all the small victories that had accumulated into something significant. The foundation had helped over 200 communities. Municipal reform laws had passed in 7 states. Lives had been changed in ways both measurable and invisible. But the real victory was smaller and more personal. It was sitting on this deck with someone he loved, in a house that felt like home, having raised a daughter who understood that justice was worth fighting for. It was the life they'd built not despite the chaos, but because of it. "I'm glad you stood up at that block party," Adriana said quietly, "even though it complicated everything and nearly destroyed both our lives." "Me too." "Really? You don't sometimes wish you'd just stayed out of it, kept your head down like you'd been doing?" Ethan thought about that version of himself. The one who'd been hiding behind routine and isolation. The one who'd convinced himself that safety meant avoiding conflict. The one who'd been slowly disappearing into a life that looked functional but felt empty. "No," he said, "because that person wasn't really living. He was just surviving. And there's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Living means being willing to fight for things that matter. To stand up even when it's scary. To build connections even when they might break." He looked at her. "Surviving is just going through motions. Living is actually being present for all of it. The good, the bad, the complicated." Adriana leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's very philosophical for someone who claims to just be a structural engineer." "I contain multitudes. You've mentioned. They stayed there until the wine was gone and the night air got cold. Then they went inside to the home they'd built together, to the life that had emerged from a single moment of courage at a neighborhood block party, to the future that was still unfolding in ways they couldn't predict. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it all again. Navigate Maya's latest campaign for justice, work on foundation projects, be part of the community they'd helped rebuild, make choices that prioritize connection over isolation, courage over safety, living over merely surviving. Because that's what they'd learned in the fire of fighting corruption and building something new. That the greatest victories aren't about destroying enemies or accumulating power. They're about showing up for the people you love, about building communities where everyone's voice matters, about proving that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stand together. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they're about finding someone who sees you completely, your fears and flaws and failures, and chooses to build a life with you anyway. That, Ethan thought as he fell asleep next to Adriana with Maya safe down the hall, was the real revolution. Not the dramatic confrontation or the satisfying victory, but the quiet daily choice to be brave enough to live fully, to love deeply, to believe that building something good was always worth the risk of having it fall apart. They'd taken that risk, and it had changed everything. Sonnet 4.5